Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome. Tonight is kind of a special night. I'm trying to get back to the roots of really sort of the notes that I made before I started this show. And one of the major points on these notes for starting Truthseekers was to explore strange and unusual topics. And we've gotten kind of pigeonholed into covering the same topics, and that's detrimental to our major focus here, or what the focus here was supposed to be. So every week we're going to be veering off into exactly that, strange and unusual topics. I've got some guests planned, one of which is an expert on psychedelics, and just some really interesting stuff going on in that world of so-called psychonauts. And tonight we're going to be delving into a strange and unusual topic, and that is electric universe. Now, I just want to make sure that we say we're just exploring a topic here, and that doesn't mean that I condone this theory or set of theories or belief system as true. It just means that I'd like to learn a lot more about it. I know a little bit about it. I've read some things. I've saw a few videos. But recently we had a panel show, and Mr. Joey Esposito was part of that panel show, started talking about some of these things from Electric Universe. And I was kind of surprised that it was so well received. And many people reached out to me and asked to have him come and be a guest and talk more about these things. I apologize. Always forget to do not disturb. Most people know when I'm doing a show, it's best not to message me, but it is what it is. So tonight we're going to be exploring this strange and unusual topic. And I wanted to just kind of do this, learn more about it, and bring you along with me for the journey. So we'll be getting into this tonight. I want to remind you that we are now live streaming on Instagram, and it appears that Instagram has fixed the issues that they had with us broadcasting. It used to cut off after the first hour. Yesterday, it let us broadcast for 2.5 hours. So I think that issue is now resolved with Instagram, and we want to thank them for being new streaming distribution partners for us. Be sure to follow me on Instagram at Truthseekers Show. And I'm going to be posting a lot more images related to the show. Anything that I take a picture of that has anything to do with the show, whether it's the masks or the sets or equipment setup, the studios, guests, I'm going to be posting there on my Instagram. So make sure you follow me. It's at Truthseeker Show. Let's bring our guest here. We have Mr. Joey Esposito. Welcome, Mr. Esposito.
How's it going? Hey, Steve, how you doing?
Good, good. I've looked into this a little bit, and I have a background in electronics and computers, so there's a lot of stuff in this that's sort of appealing to me, because to me, especially growing up, electricity and magnets were like magic to me, and figuring out how they work and what you could do with them was just super exciting to me. And to be very honest, it still is. So much of my life revolves around electricity, synthesizers, computers, electronic stuff that I build, lasers, and I get it, lasers, optics, but to build a lot of laser systems, you need to know electronics to build the power supplies and things like that. Anyway, interesting theory. Where do we begin with this?
Well, yeah, just to sort of clarify things before we do a deep dive, right?
Sure.
It's actually not that strange at all, because, so let me just first explain that within the universe model, there are scientists that still align with atomic physics, that there are particles and electrons. We're not going to break all that down. I'm going to try to keep this as light as possible, and I have a really good presentation that simplifies a lot of things. But yeah, it's not really strange at all, because what we're really talking about is electricity, magnetism, electromagnetism, which is light. Where things start to get a little more controversial is when we start talking about gravity. Now, the reality is that they still can't really prove that they know what gravity is and where it comes from. Same thing with electricity. See, they start with the charged particle, but they don't tell you what it's charged with. So now if we, fast forward to say Thunderbolts project, Wallace Thornhill, which we will talk about, he's the science guy and he still is trying to introduce electrical phenomenon, plasmic discharge, and how electrical currents propagate through space, which we will talk about. And he's trying to incorporate that while still admiring and honoring the atomic physics. And he still talks about electrons, and he still uses gravity in a traditional manner. Tonight, we're going to start off with some of the science. It's going to be info dense in the beginning, but I put it in the beginning so that it could be as brief as possible. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to corroborate why, if we just look at electricity and electrical currents solely in and of itself, and the properties by which electricity and electrical currents represent and display, like plasma, light, current, voltage, even gravity, we will discuss, is actually dielectric inertia. Okay? So when you realize that all of these fundamental forces, which there's 4 of them in atomic physics, those 4 properties are all properties of electrical current. So that's where it gets a little bit more controversial, because the atomic physicists rely on their math. And here's a disclaimer. So like when people say, oh, but they got the math to prove it. There's a difference between proving what exists and then actually being able to understand where it came from and what it does. You can, chop up anything. You could break down a song and say, oh, it's got all these parts arranged in this way, but you don't know how it came out of the person. You're not that person. You didn't generate the idea. You didn't go through the experience. So the math doesn't necessarily explain everything. And last bit is that we get gravity from Einstein's general relativity. Prior to that, there was the concept of the field. And the field was this idea, to simplify it, we could think of it as like static and think of it as neutral. So there's no charge. And then events arise from that carry a charge and then propagate the universe. That was the idea until Einstein used math to remove it and introduce relativity. And we've been off to the races ever since. But like I said, the main proponents of electrical universe theory are real scientists incorporating real information that we have from electrical engineering into the atomic structure. But then I will also incorporate a few other people that look at it from the traditional, it's all electric. And that sort of simplifies a lot of it, which for me is why it's attractive. But again, like the Truthseekers community and model, we're going to stick to that vibe tonight. We don't just align with ideologies and dogmas. That's the problem with science, is like if the math won't prove it, it's not right. Well, you're making up math anyway to prove something you can't see with your eyes. Like when they say they see a black hole, they don't see it with their eyes, people. They see it with a formula. Okay? So the idea is to try to always delineate fact from fiction like we do on Truthseekers. That's why I think this is really appropriate, because I've been doing this all my life and it's been changing as I go. And I think we should just get into it now. You can switch over to the screen if you want. Sure.
We'll get to that.
Cool. And by the way, I think we could be loose tonight. I know I'm over-prepared. We're not going to get through all of it. It's very dense.
Yeah, just wait a minute. Just so the audience knows, this dude prepared this slideshow that makes David Wilcock look lazy. He's got like this endless thing of slides.
I think I got 64 slides, people. I think I got 64 slides. Okay, so I'll tell you a quick thing about me. This is a picture of a Kirlian photography, a chakra aura photo, right? I took it at a UFO conference where I met George Norrie, Roger Lear, and I challenged them and stuff, shook their hands. They were really inquisitive about, my philosophies. So I am part of the ufological community that started when I was younger. My grandma brought over the Time Life series books, And, I got all the characters on my shirt, the Bigfoot, the everything. So that's me. Went to school for graphic design. I'm an art director. Then I switched to massage therapy. I counseled people. That's where this stuff sort of came from the healing aspect. We're not going to discuss that tonight, but that's sort of my background, how I got here. I'm obsessed with UFOs and just where we are in our place in the universe. And if this information changes and I find out it's BS, I'll be moving on to some other trajectory, because for me, it's all about corroboration. So let's go. All right, so switch over here to my screen. All right, intro to electric universe theory. So the electric universe model of cosmology challenges traditional understanding as gravity, as I mentioned, being the dominant force that shapes the cosmos. As I mentioned, it's one of four fundamental forces. We'll get more into that later. But the proponents of the EU model recognize gravity for what it is, which is dielectric inertia. It's part of an electrical current. So they also recognize how electromagnetic fields, they perturbate other bodies. Perturbation is something that's going to come up in this conversation. So remember this term. It's kind of like agitated. But they use it in cosmology because you can have a body that has a field around it, and they don't necessarily touch, but their fields interact, and it alters their course. That's called perturbation. So last point, in traditional models, they claim that space is empty. It's space. It's a vacuum. Whereas
Sure.
EU is filled with what I refer to as the ether. More appropriately, from the science aspect and the engineering aspect, it's dielectric inertia. It's the negative pole towards least resistance. And we're going to break that down. So these electrical currents and interactions, they happen within the field. The field is like the fertile ground. It is like the soil for electrical currents to spring forth, which is pretty much what vegetation and all growth is. Now, just to get into an image, so
I don't want to scare you, Joey. I don't want to scare you, but you better do good tonight, because you got alien scientists in the audience watching you, and like, he is a physics guy, man. That dude can do math that just hurts my head even looking at the math. He's a good guy. Welcome, alien scientist.
Yeah, welcome. And I was going to say we could do Q&A if we have time, because the whole idea is to be challenged. That's the point, But here's a quick image. This is a fractal scaling of electrical charges. Really quickly, a fractal is like a pattern. So you can have one staff or one column. And then if you add, a branch, that's a fractal for growth. And all you have to do is replicate that and you get a tree. So we see fractal scaling of electrical phenomenon at every scale, from a brain cell looking to the same as a universe, plasmic discharge, which we're going to look at in the laboratory, that their electromagnetic discharge array, or the way that these fields propagate in the same formations and patterns as they do in the lab. If you look at the bottom right, you'll see a spiraling galaxy, okay, with its source point or fulcrum in the center. And below it is the evolution of plasma in a laboratory. A city from a bird's eye view, and a neuron. Neurons are electrical bursts in your brain. So what's electricity, right? We got to get that in. So it comes from the word electron. That's where the atomists, the word atom, like Adam and Eve, atom, the great atom, the mighty mortal man, the electron, the Elohim. This is some of the astrotheosophy that I'll be incorporating as we get into this too, to make it a bit more interesting and provocative. But it comes from the word amber. And they notice that it'll generate static electricity. I made static in bold because, like I said, static is like the field. So where did the electricity come from? Just from rubbing it, from creating heat and friction, disrupting the electrons, right? But where did the electrons come from? They came from the field. So this understanding of electrical current and everything started in the 17th century. And like I said, it comes from charged particles, but they don't know where it comes from. Charged particles are the movement of negative electrons. That's basically the radiant field around the central focal point, which I will refer to as source point or the fulcrum. It's the still point of the lever. You have a fulcrum and you have a lever. So you have positive and negative charges that propagate voltage until the battery dies or whatever. And you have the still point fulcrum. The idea here, well, I'm going off my words here, but essentially you have voltage and a current, and it's measured by Ohm's law. We're not going to get into math if you want to look that up. But again, there's math to explain electricity. We know how to harness it. We just don't know where it comes from. So we consider the field. So that's the point where we're at right now. And there's resistance to the flow of current. We'll talk more about that. Now, what's magnetism? Because they're inextricably linked. There's no electromagnetism. I'll bring in some of, the greater understanding. Magnetism is a radiation of an electrical burst. So there is charge and there is discharge. So magnetism is like the conductor that holds everything together. It's the sheathing of the universe. It's the boundary of all things. So everything that carries a charge emanates in a magnetic field around it that envelopes it and sort of tucks it in. This is why everything in the reality has a boundary. So conversely, also, if you change a magnetic field, meaning if you perturb, remember that word? If you perturb the field around an electrical charge, this electromagnetic field, it will also change the current. So electromagnetic field radiation is what we refer to as light. And also, by coiling a wire around a magnet and then actually moving that magnet, you'll get voltage, which is electromagnetic induction. So some people may have heard of the Faraday cage. I didn't look up that data. And by the way, I did use AI to help me with this, but I wrote a lot of this by hand. I have papers of notes that I've taken over years. But essentially, it's what I said. In simple terms, if you take a magnet, which is magnetized, okay, there's a source point in the middle, which is neuter. That's the fulcrum. And then the positive and negative poles, okay, the dielectric pole, the negative, and then the positive pole, force and motion, are balanced by the center, where the north and south pole, we say are attracted, are actually voided. If you take that magnet and you move that magnet with a coil wrapped around it, you will get a charge out of the coil. Also, conversely, if you have a battery hooked up to a wire and then you put the magnet around the coil, because the magnet has a magnetic field, that magnetic field will affect the charge. So this is a good point to mention, that within EU theory, they don't have to get rid of the math. They don't have to get rid of the atomic science. But they do want to incorporate how these electromagnetic fields and the charges that they emit, how they perturb other bodies in the universe. And so those are iron filaments, which are magnetized, meaning they're polarized, north and south pole. And you can see how that bar magnet, the way those iron filaments are aligning with source point. So the source point is the 0 point in the center of the bar magnet. Okay, that's the still point fulcrum, like I said. And you can see all the iron filaments are going towards the center. And in the middle, there's like this pocket, right? An arc.
Yeah.
Arcing current. And a little astrotheosophy I'll throw in, because I'm a big fan of etymology, the study of words.
You know what's funny is I still have a big container of iron filings and magnets in a box.
That's fun. Remember the guy that it was on a cardboard, it was his face, and you would paint his beard?
Yeah, yeah, with the little pen with the magnet on it, you drag the stuff over and put a mustache on the guy. Yeah.
I loved all that stuff. Now look at these other flows. So basically, electrical current, it propagates from, like I said, a still point, and then it moves in a vector. Another philosophy I could bring in is, think of a bungee cord. You have a knot at the bridge, which is stationary. Okay, that's the fulcrum or the source point. That's 0. And then the explosion or the exhaustion of energy, so that's charge. The knot at the bridge is charge, potential energy. And kinetic energy is the bungee cord off the bridge in an arc. Now this arc reaches a point of resistance, and then it voids itself back to the bridge. So one thing I want to keep repeating, because it's hard for the brain to understand, because we're so used to this idea of attraction. We're talking about magnets. Magnets of opposite polarity are not attracted to each other. They were not magnetized until they were, how do I simplify this? Everything that's made of matter came out of the 0 point, and everything that returns to the 0 point returns to 0. So the fruit that falls from the tree, it rots and turns to a gas. It started as a gas from the ether, because the ether is essentially a gas. That's what we think it is. It's an inert, subtle gas. But to finish up the magnetic conversation, these are just more field lines, because we're going to get into the torsion field, which is the model for how celestial bodies are organized and created through electrical currents. So you could see the toroid around the horseshoe magnet, around the bar magnet, and you see the electromagnetic field, how it goes through that central column, and it still carries a charge, but the electromagnetic field spirals around it. So
Okay.
now look at the animation and think about our solar system. Now,
Yeah, very similar.
when we talk about amperage, okay, voltage or volume of decibels, that would be the red curve, right? And look at how it propagates through space-time. The magnetic field in blue, which is horizontal, and I'm going to bring in the cross or the ankh in this astrotheosophical perspective, because we're actually making really good time. The magnetic field, like I said, it traverses out horizontally to a point of resistance, and it acts as an insulator. Okay, we're gonna talk about this dynamic. This is just an introduction at first. Everything's moving forward through that trajectory. We could call it space-time. Let's just keep it simple. We're moving through space-time. The battery of our solar system is the sun. That's the fulcrum, or really it's a black hole as a fulcrum, and everything's spinning around it. But we use our sun. Our sun is moving through time like this. Okay? So you have amperage, which is the electric field, and that electric field meets a point of resistance and then eventually collapses in on itself again. And what you get is waveforms like this over billions of light years. And those are called Berkeland currents, and we're going to get to that. Now let's just wrap up gravity real quick. And if anybody has any questions, I think we're actually really making good time. So I'm just checking in on the chat. If you want to do a praise the cash, we could do that, bud.
Sure. I was just saying that I was going to read them after your presentation, but I can read it. Thank you, Shan Nisba, with a kind of generous $5 super chat. And thank you for being a member. Says, I have no idea what's going on, but I'm down. UFO Shane. Well, thank you for your kindness, generosity, and support, and helping us to praise the cash.
Praise the cash, praise the cash, praise the cash.
All right. There you go. Thank you very much. We appreciate all of you guys. Thanks for appreciating us.
I appreciate everybody being here, by the way. Thank you so much. We're almost done with the data, and then it's going to get a lot more fun and more loose. We'll just have more of a conversation after this. Okay, so gravity, like I said, is one of the four fundamental forces. So in traditional atomic physics, they got gravity, they got electromagnetism, and then weak interaction and strong interaction, okay? And they're simply all effects rendered by active electric currents in the universe. Now, the EU model also proposes that space is not empty at all, and it's filled with this ether. Under this model, gravity.
And just to be clear, the ether model was pre-Einstein, and before Einstein, people subscribed more closely to this explanation of the universe and empty space in the universe. Tesla talked a lot about the ether and things like that, right?
Yeah, I didn't even mention Tesla yet, but the idea is Tesla understood the wireless nature of the static field, which is the medium that can carry a charge without a wire. But what happened is the money men, the grifters, see, I'm incorporating.
Can't put it on a meter. I can't put it on a meter. I can't sell it. Westinghouse said that and immediately dropped Tesla's funding when he realized what Tesla was really developing. Yeah.
Yeah. And so now I actually was going to put this in the slide, but I'm just going to say it. The atomists, right? The people that went to Harvard, that paid all the money, that come from the bloodlines, they're the grifters of the scientia, the grifters of the scientific dogma. They're the ones that write the textbooks, man. They keep us in the box. And we're also going to talk about like that phrase, I'm stuck in a box, because, you know, radial prime mover, radiant fields that radiate in an arc, they're bound by cubic wave fields. I know that's a lot to mutter, but again, we can get more into this later, but let's wrap up gravity. So the idea is that gravity is not a separate force, okay? Let's just simplify it. It's not a separate force. It's part of toroidal dynamics, okay? And that's what we're going to get in next, because we see toroidal formations all across the universe. And so what is the toroidal nature of an electromagnetic field? Or simply put, a magnetic field, which is emanating electrically charged gas, which is light. Okay, so when you see electrically charged gas, that's swamp gas. That's what you know, what's his face was trying to debunk originally under Project Bluebeam, Blue Book. Swamp gas is electrically charged plasma that is basically a charged toroid that's in the field, and it's just discharging voltage. And we will see. I will, if I have to, I'll fast forward to it. How, you know, and I hate to be like as a debunker myself, because I still love the idea that there could be UFOs and aliens and all this stuff. But when you look at plasma and how it moves, it looks sentient.
Yeah,
And
yeah, I've seen
that's
some plasma will blow you away. It looks intelligent somehow. There's organization to it, or plasma can be manipulated in ways that it looks like there's, you know, some order and organization to it. It's not just random, you know.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, because the idea of these fields being organized, now they have the math to plot it, but I like the why or the how. How is it organized? I mean, you can plot it, but like, how is that organized, and why is it organizing, and what is it organizing to? Well, the toroid that we're going to get into, it's a self-sustainable system. It self-assimilates and self-organizes itself. Now, at this point, I should also mention waves are not a thing, and a toroid is not a thing. This is a model. A wave is a model to understand the dynamics of energy flow. So let's come back to that word protuberance. If I have water in a glass, you know, and if I tilt my whiskey, it stays level, okay? But if I really perturb that glass,
I didn't even know you were drinking. See, you gave it away.
Oh,
You could have. Yeah,
no, but
it'd be different if you had a gallon jug with you, like some of the other panel members usually had. You know.
Yeah, I'm not really a drinker.
Oh, I'm just teasing you. Yeah, enjoy yourself. You know.
Thank you, man.
And you know what? I always found when I was doing live shows for live audiences, I was once doing a show and somebody offered me a glass of wine, and at first I went, no, I would never drink before a show. It might screw up the show. But I did that day because I was nervous or what. From then on, every single show, I carried a glass of wine, or I carried a wine in my case, and I would have one glass of wine, small glass of wine, and it just relaxed me and calmed me down. And yeah, it's good in small doses.
Yeah, I mean, well, technically, what it does is it like thins the blood, and slows everything down. Yeah, okay, but where are we? Oh, toroids. I even actually have a model here. I could show you what it looks like. Okay, so what I'm saying simply is that this shape that we're going to get into, which is called a torus, it's a geometric shape. The inversion of it is called a hyperboloid. Okay, what that represents is the sustainable field of the universe. So this is what we're looking at right now. Now, it's not exactly correct. I already see alien scientists picking away. I'm not a mathematician. But, you know, there's if you want to look up the math for a toroid.
Oh, but listen, relax. He's not like going to be like confrontational. He's just commenting. It's okay. Like, you know, and
yeah.
He's a good guy. He may have some questions or clarifications or counterpoints, but we're all here to learn something. And this toroid stuff is interesting to me because I have read a bunch of stuff on toroids, and I mean, if you think about it, that shape there, you put a magnet at the center, and that's the magnetic field. So toroids are everywhere in nature. They're like this. Yeah, this shape, this construct is in more than just magnets and electricity. It's in, other things as well. It's interesting. I always think about intelligent design when confronted with things like this. People think everything's an accident, but some things are just so perfectly designed and replicated in the universe that it's hard for me to not believe that somebody designed all this,
Right. Yeah. And I think that, absorbing all this stuff and getting to this point in my life, I'm 45, definitely 30 years into like looking into all this stuff and feeling it, applying principles, seeing if I get a return on my actions. Yeah, it's I don't know where I was going with that, but just I can do an entire lecture just on this shape alone. So just to I do want to address alien scientists. So for instance, like I failed math, but what I'm saying is that, like, just for the people who don't know, because he probably does know, the toroid is an actual model in geometry, in spatial Cartesian geometry, and it is the shape of electromagnetic fields around the universe. So it is the field, it is a model. What I'm trying to accentuate is that this thing doesn't exist. This just shows the flow. It shows the topography of the flow. And I want to correct that. As you can see, it's just a grid that's tucking into itself and then exploding out the bottom. It's actually a three-dimensional S-curve. It's the sine wave in 3D spiraling down the central core, corkscrewing, and then evolving outside the perimeter. So here's the description. Actually, I skipped it. So essentially, instead of a linear representation, this magnetic field, which starts as charge in the center and then explodes or propagates as an electrical arc, right? And then it starts going in this torsion field pattern until it discharges its voltage. It's circulating out to the exterior, which we call surface tension. That's the electromagnetic boundary, okay? And then it meets that point of resistance like the bungee cord and returns back to the 0 point for recirculation. And it could be sustainable and just keep going. So it's like a tourniquet right in the middle. It's called the 0 point plane of inertia. Let me jump back. It was a couple of days ago, we were talking about flat Earth. And I want to clarify what I was saying again then. When people talk about flat Earth, they fail at providing a premise for understanding what they're promulgating. What I mean is, if you think of Cartesian coordinates, if you're looking at 2D, which is ultimately flat, and it doesn't have a vertical axis until you bring in the third dimension, well, flat can't even really be imagined by us because flat doesn't even have a thickness. So what I was saying before about flat earthers is that I think when they conceptualize flat, they're thinking consensually agreed upon like a flat table. But a flat surface in a Cartesian three-dimensional, space is not flat in terms of spatial geometry, Euclidean geometry. And see, we can't get all technical like that tonight, but I wanted to clarify that because there are people in the room that are smart. Everybody's smart, but there are people in the room that are special that know a lot. And so, there's a lot to get into, but it's hard to simplify. So what we're going to focus on moving forward is these electrical fields in the universe and how they propagate and, how it relates to, the evolution of cosmic bodies. So we're getting into the toroid. So quickly put, like I said, there's a staff in the middle. That's the central fulcrum, and it meets the 0 point in the center. Okay. And so positive charges are radiation. That's the loss of energy. And then that energy meets a point of resistance at the edge of the toroid, which is surface tension, the boundary of all things. And then it envelopes itself through dielectric acceleration. Okay. Corkscrewing. So, like all spiritualists, they talk about the spirals. Everything is a spiral. Well, here we go. Let's simplify it. The spiraling nature of all geometries and these phi ratios is because that's how these electrical arcing currents propagate through toroidal dynamics. So the inverse of a toroid, or the central staff, Okay, that's called a hyperboloid. That represents the dielectric. So that's the 0 point. The center of that staff would be the 0. That would be source point. That would be the fulcrum. That would be the Higgs boson, the 0 point plane of inertia. And if you looked at a galaxy, that would be the accretion disk. We're going to look at the Sombrero galaxy soon, I think. Ah, perfect. We have a little video entertainment coming up. We're making good time, too, so we could do this. So what we're going to look at here is proof positive through magnetoholography. We're going to see Kenneth Wheeler, who's a very smart man. He's a Neoplatonist. He knows several languages. He translates ancient Greek and Sanskrit, and he wrote a book on magnetism. If anybody wants to look into more sciencey, nerdy stuff that's too much for tonight, buy Ken's book, okay? Now, what Ken's going to show us is what's called a ferrocell. A ferrocell is 2 very thin panes of glass with 1 drop of oil, okay, very fine oil, with those magnetized ferro material in it at like nanoscale, okay? So there's ferro material, magnetized material inside this oil trapped between 2 panes of glass. And when he puts a magnet underneath of it, you can see the toroidal structure.
Now, the ceramic or the speaker magnet, of course, is squared off. So it's obviously not rounded. It doesn't matter what shape the magnet is. The actual centrifugal divergent force and motion vectors that actually show the magnetic and dielectric field. And this is the reason why we see lines. We see constructive and destructive interference is perfectly toroidal or donut shaped. And of course, the negative image of a donut shape is, of course, a hyperboloid or an hourglass shape. So if you actually take the negative image of this, you will see the dielectric. Now, this is a really weak magnet. I'll show you a really powerful magnet here in a second. And I'll show you how much more sensitive this structure, this new super sensitive supercell is. But look, as I actually skim along the edge, now realize that the liquid showing the constructive and destructive interference is infinitely thinner than a human hair. And what we're doing is we're using the light and the dispersed ferrofluid. The ferrofluid is not clumping, by the way. The dispersed ferrofluid is all through this. The only reason why you're seeing light stripes in certain areas and dark stripes in others is constructive and destructive interference between the magnetic and dielectric. Now, I'll explain this in other videos and I have in the past, but also in my book. You see these little bright spots right here. There's little tiny bright spots along the lines of intersection. You see those here? Let me actually zoom in a little better. You see these little bright spots right here and here and here? You notice they occur at lines of intersection, right? Let me actually. Now this supercell is so sensitive that I actually have to keep moving the magnet, otherwise it'll burn in. You can see like a light burn in mark. It's not literally burn, I just call it burn because it's so sensitive, the powerful magnetic field.
I wanted to pause for a second because you said a lot of technical things and I want to clarify. So,
yeah, this is like Mr. Big Words. And also, just explain what ferrofluid is for those that may be unaware.
Yeah, so ferrofluid, you could buy it, and you can actually buy ferrocells. There's companies that make it to explore this phenomenon. So ferro is magnetized metal. Again, I don't know the complete science, but the best analogy or comparison is cassette tape. So cassette tape is a piece of acetate plastic or whatever, like a sheet, right? A ribbon is the tape. And then there's ferro material on it. When you record to a tape, it's iron filaments, basically, shaved iron filaments stuck to this piece of plastic. When you shoot it with electrical current in the waveforms of the frequencies of the music, it makes those things arrange in a pattern. Now, when that pattern comes across the playhead, it vibrates, or it picks up that arrangement of that ferric material, which are, very small pieces of iron, and we hear sound. Okay, so that's another thing too, is I didn't really put sound into this because I think that's another thing, and we're both musicians, so I want to make that special. But sound is a perturbation of the ether as well. So when electricity perturbates the neutral ether field, you get an active toroid. You have neutral field, and then you have perception, or, this is where the quantum wave principle or the double slit experiment comes in, where they say the perceiver is making it happen. Well, that's what's happening. That's the mystery of life, is that we don't know who the perturber is. I failed to mention that, by the way. So so let's say this. Atomic scientists fail to mention where the charge comes from. They start with the charged particle. EU scientists start with the field, and there's perturbance in the field. Who's perturbing the field? Who made the first perturbance? We don't know. So there is a mystery, and you have to allow for the mystery. You can call it God, you could call it source, you could call it creator, you could think it's a video game we're in, but the idea is that, there's always going to be, because polarity is everything. There is what is, and then there's the negation of what is, or the opposite of what is. So if we think we know that there's a field, well, then there's somebody that created the field or something that created the field, and that's the part that we don't know. So there's another video of Ken that I want to show.
Now, the ceramic
this next one. Okay, so with this one, this is some sciencey stuff, but I'm using this video to simplify it through language. In general relativity, they talk about bodies that have mass and that they accelerate towards each other. And that this acceleration towards each body, is increased with the size of the mass of these bodies. Because they say gravity attracts, right? And the more gravitational mass between two gravitationally heavy bodies, they attract to each other. What Ken is going to do right now is he's going to squash that. Because what he's going to show you is he's going to show you two magnets that both have their positive pole, the electric pole, and the negative pole, the dielectric pole. And when he puts, two poles of the same polarity, positive to negative, and they want to attract, what he says is he's trying really hard to keep them from sticking together, right? Now, when he does that, you could see another black hole in the center of the Ferro cell. What he explains here is that these two magnetic fields are not accelerating towards each other, meaning the magnets are not being accelerated into each other as if they're going to crash. The third black hole, which is literally what a black hole is, it's the dielectric pole of a planetary system. It's the 0 point of a planetary system that creates suns, which is its positive pole of its battery that's radiating and discharging its voltage throughout the universe as plasma with a half-life. So what he shows is that when you take these two magnets, the magnetic field that is being radiating out is actually not being attracted to the other magnet. It's being voided at its lowest null pressure point. What that means is that you see another 0 point, another dielectric hole. It's not a hole really, but what it is, it's a neuter pole. Those fields are not being stuck together. Those bodies are not trying to collide. Their voltage is being voided at the lowest pressure gradient. So let him explain it, but it's really hard to simplify these things because it is complicated, but try to make best with this and just kind of pay attention to what you're noticing. Recognize that the fields around those magnets are being sucked into the central toilet bowl, if you will. There's a third toilet bowl that's being created because these fields have to seek their lowest null pressure gradient. There's no attraction in the universe. All there is there is charge and then a release of that charge, and then that charge has to be voided to its lowest pressure gradient.
You see something, I'm centering it here so you can see it right dead smack in the middle of the supercell. You see that black hole right in the middle of the supercell? That is the null pressure gradient between these two magnets that are trying to jump towards one another. And of course, I'm exerting strength on these powerful neodymium iron borons to keep from jumping to one another. But they're not accelerating towards one another. No, they're not. They're accelerating towards right smack in the middle of that supercell. You can see, that's not, see, here's both poles of this magnet, both poles of this magnet. I'm not performing any trickery here on you. I'm actually backing both of them off. They're both off of the either side of the supercell. But as I let them slowly creep towards one another. You see that hole right in the middle of the supercell? I know you can see it. That is what they're accelerating towards, not towards one another.
That's
There's
interesting.
a pressure gradient in the ether.
So they're attracted to some
En
pressure
masse.
gradient.
You see something I'm
Okay, good. That's all you needed to see. Now, first of all, let's just clarify, and then I will place this into why this is an important introduction into cosmology from an electromagnetic standpoint, because obviously planetary bodies emanate electric fields, magnetic fields. Okay, so this perturbance model of gravity being the only sole attribute to this perturbance model, and this idea that these bodies collide because they're being attracted, this is very important, and you can adopt this in, because theoretically, I'll just say right now, that thing in the middle, it's like a black hole being created. Well, what's a black hole? The black hole is the dielectric pole. What's the dielectric pole? It's the 0-point plane of the inertia. It's where all charges go back to zero. Okay, so there's two terms that he'll use in his videos too. If you continue to watch him later on at your leisure, he uses space and counter space. So counter space is where you were before you were born. Counter space is where the seedling was before it appeared on the tree. Counter space is the dielectric field. The dielectric field is the ether. The ether is the 0 point, and it's the other dimension. See, this removes dimensions and everything too, and it removes all the quantum crackery, because what he says very comically, and he's a bit of a narcissist too, but he's super smart. He deserves it. He says, like, Mother Nature is like a hippie chick. She's very simple. She's very simple. We complicate it where we chop everything up and then we try to realign it with the math. It's very simplex. It's this toroidal sustainable. It's not even a pump. What it is a pressure mediation, sound pressure levels. Okay. When you look at a waveform, it's from point to point with pressure in the middle. That's what we're going to get into soon. The Berkeland currents. This is really freaking cool. So we talked about the toroid and the hyperboloid, right? Is like it's folded within itself. Get ready for this. Okay, this is just goosebump city. This is actual cell division under microscopy of a graphene. I think it's no, it's actually cell division. Sorry, I have another thing with graphene. But you will see the toroidal nature of the cell division happening in real time.
Oh, that is neat.
When you look at it, you will see two corkscrewing filaments. Okay, so you have the ball, right? And then it changes its whatever, its voltage or whatever, and it folds in on itself. And then what comes out of it is two corkscrewing little red things, right? That's a dye, by the way. That's not the actual color. Those two corkscrewing red things that get squeezed out of the central column is ejection, is discharge. You will see that on planetary bodies. And we will also get into, that's the symbol of the caduceus, which people say it's the serpent wrapped around the staff of Hermes. It also represents Kundalini, and it represents the chakras. So you see why I'm at this point? Because as an energy therapist, like I did all that. I actually even worked with people and applied all those methodologies. I actually sense fields and I work with people, and not anymore, not so much anymore, but I'm trying to be more practical. And so when you can actually see it, you know, under microscopy, it'll fold in on itself, separate like that. So it's like life is folded in on itself. If you look at your arm, right, everything is folded in. You're born folded in, okay? And then you positively radiate. That reaches surface tension. And then eventually kyphosis, your back starts to dry up and you start folding into yourself again. Life is a pump. It's a sequential motion from 0 point through motion to 0 point to rest. So 0 to 0. With motion in between. Rest, rest. Next slide here. Okay, so review. This is a little bit of a nerdy review, but we're making awesome time because we're only at about 10 minutes shy of an hour. Okay, so dielectricity That's charge. That's the hyperboloid, the inverse of the toroid, the central core. This is the neutral field of counter space. It erases space. We live in space, right? We live in a pressure-mediated, plasmatic, electrically charged condition as a toroid. Centripetal acceleration is the return to source point. So if we were looking at the toroid and we're spiraling down back to source point, we are returning back to the lowest null pressure gradient as dielectric inertia, which is gravity. It's not attracting, it's voiding, okay? Voidance over attraction. If things get stuck in the universe and there's no movement, if there's no pulse, you get a swamp. Same thing with health. That's why this aligns with health. The body has to keep moving. There has to be a polarity relationship based on a still point fulcrum. Okay, the fulcrum of mind, where the lever pulsates. The mind is thinking, but just because you're thinking that your life is shit, it doesn't mean that it is. Okay, so magnetism is then the discharge. That's the envelope. That is the essentially the sheathing or the shielding of universes and planetary bodies. Everything has a boundary. So when there is potential energy that is discharged, it's exhausted. And that's when it enters into toroidal force in motion. Okay? So toroidal is force in motion. It's a 3D force vector of any shape, molecule, whatever. If it's in space, if we call it matter, it has a half-life because it's discharging its voltage until it reaches 0 point, and then it goes back to ether. But while it's discharging voltage, as a toroidal dynamic flow of positive and negative voltage, right? Discharging its voltage, getting to its 0 point, right? In that process, we call that light. We see it, a little sliver of it, as radiation. Okay, so electric fields, when they propagate away from 0 point, is centrifugal divergence from source. So
well, you like these big words, man.
Well, I'm repeating it a lot. So like you get it in because so essentially, if I'm the 0 point, right? Okay, and here's the beginning of my toroid. 0 point, source point. Okay, centrifugal divergence away from source point, right? Then I meet a resistance. Then it's centripetal convergence back to source point, right? So centrifugal divergence away, surface tension is met, electrical resistance is met, full capacitance is met, resistance ensues, and that voltage has to be voided, so it returns back to its origin at its center, and that return is centripetal acceleration back to source point, because all charges want to meet the point of least resistance. This is electrical engineering. It's not quackery. And surface tension, again, this is the point of physical manifest. Everything that's electrically charged has a boundary around it. I really do believe in acoustic levitation, which we're going to see soon. That's probably how they built the pyramids. I think that that's what they were carrying was the Ankh. We're going to get into that right now, actually. Yeah.
Wait, you think you think they used acoustic levitation?
Yes, because, and we're going to get into it.
I just saw just a side note, but Jeremy McGowan, who's been a guest here before, is a very science guy. He built that Osiris vehicle with all the crazy sensors to go hunt for UFOs. His daughter just entered a science fair and built an incredibly impressive acoustic levitator. Now, of course, it's just levitating like a ping pong ball or something like that, but there's no reason, I suppose, that you couldn't scale up the power of a system like that to levitate very heavy objects, right? I want to build one. I want to build one now, and I figure if this guy's daughter could build one for, I've never built one. I've always wanted to. I'm going to do that.
Well, yeah, I found this TikTok. I think I got that in here. So let me just
awesome.
let me knock out Berkeland currents real quick because I did mention that. What you're looking at here is electrical filaments that span up to, could be billions of light years. We don't know. Some of them are really small, some of them are huge, but what they are is twin electrical filaments that are coiled up on each other. Okay, so you have positive filament and negative filament, and as they discharge their voltage over these, over the space-time, you can see they coil, right? And they meet these points of resistance and then coil back in on themselves. So if you look at like one pinch point from here to here, this is actually called a Z-pinch in plasma physics and study of Berkeland currents. This is called a Z-pinch. That's the neuter pole. And then the next one is a neuter pole from 0 to 0. And you see how that resembles the shape of an eye or like a muscle belly? Because that's why your body is shaped like that. Essentially,
Okay.
I'll get to the end, but the grand finale is like your body is essentially an electrolytic capacitor under a pressure-mediated condition. Like you chew food, it's called peristalsis. Again, big words. You don't have to get it all in tonight. But, this pinch point to pinch point, that's a reduction in voltage. And those points are called Z-pinches. And that's where the black hole would be, or we talked about the neuter point in the center of the toroid. So this is essentially, toroidal energy in motion. This is voltage propagating space-time from pinch point to pinch point. And basically that's plasma. That's electrically charged gas under a pressure-mediated condition, propagating the universe at large scales. Now, this is where it's going to get really fun. So this guy, I don't know where this guy went. I don't know if he invented this. His name is David LaPont. This is called primer fields. This information has been on the internet for like 12 years, and I haven't seen anything from this guy. But if you want to see electrically charged gas in a pressure condition inside of a tube and what that looks like, you're going to see it right now.
In this presentation, you will be shown that correcting this one basic misunderstanding of magnetic field also explains most all of our problems in physics and astrophysics.
It's a big
I
claim.
believe that this magnetic field structure is an intrinsic property of all matter. Therefore, you cannot have a particle of matter unless these magnetic fields are there to form it and confine it. To further understand these magnetic fields and validate this new theory, hundreds of experiments were conducted utilizing a vacuum chamber and specially constructed bowl-shaped magnetic field emitters. When 70,000 volts of electricity is applied, the plasma formations that you are now seeing appear.
That's cool.
A variety of purging gases.
Okay, notice the ejection ports. He's creating, this is a plasma toroid. When it gets really large, it looks like a galaxy. It's the same shape as a UFO, which is what I corroborate in a minute. But this is ejection, discharge of energy. And then the ring around it would be the 0-point plane of inertia. Okay, that central column, the dielectric getting sucked back in and then exploding out the horizontal. Again, that's the astrotheosophically, that's what the cross means. The masculine seed going into the earth, which is called downward causation in physics. That would be, the gravitation, which would be the, regeneration, putting the seed back in the earth. And then the exploding of the seed, and then the radiating of that life is light at the periphery of the earth, oppositional to where it was in the soil underneath the earth, right? So it goes in and it goes out. Down, up is oppositional. So you see that here, that's basically what swamp gas would be. It's charged, you're looking at charged gas. It's an inert gas in a glass tube. And what he has is two magnets that are toroidal shaped. So if you want to think of a toroid as like two V's, so there's like a vessel coming in and then ejection coming out, right? Like that almost. Okay, so he has one bowl that's scooped like this, and that's either the negative or the positive, and the charges spiral down into that magnet. And then the magnet of opposite polarity is oppositional to it. It's a bowl upside down. But essentially, he calls them bowl magnets. And what he also calls the toroid is he calls it a ball shape. Not for nothing, but, a finished product, in the mind of God that uses electrical arcing currents, the Ark of the Covenant, to create the forms that God wants to express. It's going to look like balls of light. But those balls of light are stacked to create a molecule. And then those molecules are stacked to create an element, right? Or whatever. So it's fractal scaling. micro femtotesla charges at the nanoscale that build up to create form. These massive plasmatic discharges that are represented as twin coiled filaments is where it kind of begins, right? Well, it begins with the ether, but he's basically showing you the beginning of a sun, you know, or whatever in the universe. He's building a plasma ball. He's building swamp gas, you know. I think that's amazing. I wouldn't want to build this because it's very high voltage.
In this presentation, you
Yeah, it's
the
dangerous.
next one,
It's very these. One of the things that made me incredibly nervous about some of the laser systems that I built a long time ago was the potential to shock the shit out of, you know, like to really hurt yourself, because some of them require super high voltages. And now things are much simpler. Now you could just buy a laser diode on eBay that's, you know, insanely powerful for $50 now. But back in the day, you had to build the power supply, and you know, that kind of stuff makes me nervous when those power supplies are so high power you could kill yourself. You know, you gotta be pretty curious to want to keep playing with that stuff, you know.
well, when you talk to Ken, if you listen to Ken Wilbur, the guy from, somebody posted his link. Thank you very much for doing that. The guy with the Ferro cell. Oh, what was I saying? Oh, I had a brain fart there.
So we're into flying saucers now, though.
Well, yeah. The only reason why, so we're not talking about flying saucers, but I want you to look at the shape of the Sombrero Galaxy. I want you to remember what you just saw in the primer field's plasmatic discharge, right? It's the same shape. We spoke about the bulbous aspect in the center, right, which is its source point, and then it's radiating out to the accretion disk. And we see the ejection, which you can't see it in the Sombrero Galaxy image, but in other images, high-resolution images, you can see electrical corkscrewing filaments coming out of the top and the bottom of that galaxy. But I'm showing you the flying saucer because of the similarity in shape. So again, we're trying to bring clarity here, right? I'm not talking about Bob Lazar, but this shape represents the same shape as toroidal fields. And when they talk about the reverse engineered crafts, or as far as I'm concerned, this is Project Paperclip, you know, anti-gravitic, whatever the hell you want to call it, but they're using these. Let me go back. These craft probably most likely were created by the Nazis, not aliens. That's just my take, but that's not what we're talking about. I'm telling you to look at the shape of the craft, and that if they actually exist and they do use 0-point energy, which Greer can go F himself because it's not propulsion. It's not propulsion, grifter. It's implosion. It's cavitation. Okay? There's no propulsion. There's no quantum anything.
What did you say? It's not this, grifter. It's not propulsion, grifter.
I'm starting to sound like you, Steven.
Well, I sometimes I think Greer he has the. You know, I loved it when he was on Theories of Everything with Kurt. They asked him to explain the physics behind his claims, and he basically said, "Buy the book." Like he couldn't do it. He couldn't explain it. And if your theory is so weak you can't explain it, like, you know, he's a character, that guy.
Like by the way, so like as you can see at this point, because I'm clarifying as I go along, right? I've only given science of stuff that's known that we actually use every single day: magnetism, electricity. I'm only showing you other things that also exist, only like 2 or 3 points from Ken, this fact of protuberance, right? That there's actually a dielectric null pressure point. And they don't consider that. They have math to say, oh, there's black holes. But yeah, what is a black hole? It's a null pressure point. Well, then why don't they talk about the pressure? Why don't they talk about the electromagnetic field radiation that bounces off everything like invisible goop, right? We're going to see more in the primer fields. I kind of almost skipped this. In the second primer fields video, it's not in the tube anymore. There's no gas. There's no electricity. Which, by the way, if we go back to the bar magnet with the iron filaments, there's no electricity. So why are all those things going around in that way? Because there's always an active field. That's why when you put the magnet underneath the ferro cell, you could see the toroidal field. Now, that field looks like it's still, just like we're going to see these marbles or these beads look like they're still, but everything's always in motion. It's just the frame rate of our eyes. It gets more complicated after that because we're in a limited bit rate, right? So we're going to touch on holography because essentially light, right? you were talking, oh, laser. I got it back. Okay. You were talking about lasers. A laser is coherent light. And Ken will tell you that a light is coherent source point. It's not incandescent. It's source point energy. Okay? That's the reason why they use it in the double slit experiment. You can't use incandescent light because it's already fractaled, right? It's already bifurcated. So you need coherent laser from source point. And holography, I'll just tell you holography right now because I know it off the top of my head. If you take like a little small swimming pool, like a kid's pool, whatever, and you freeze it, ice or whatever, right after you drop a marble in there and you get the wave reflection, but this is very important. The wave reflection has to bounce off the perimeter of the pool and then collapse back in on itself, okay? The quantum wave function. What Dave was talking about before, not Dave, Ken. What Ken was talking about before, I can clarify. Interference patterns, destructive and constructive. They're just oppositional terms. Destructive and constructive interference patterns. When these waves cross over, like when you get two spheres that circles that cross over and you get that eye shape like I showed you, that's the interference pattern. That's what they call the particle. What that is the formation of that pocket of pressure under toroidal dynamics, which as soon as it is formed, it immediately starts deflating or returning to 0 point. Make sense? Now in this video for primer fields, he's going to show you how the Bowl magnets in and of themselves, he's going to show you the 0 point plane of inertia. When he sticks BBs at the 0 point plane of inertia, you will see how magnetism is the insulator of the universe and it is an organizing. Now, I think it's intelligent. Can I say a God made it? I don't know. But magnetism is the organizer. Potential energy is like the storage of God's mind. It's considered the divine feminine, right? It's whatever's in the black hole that we don't know. But then as soon as we bring mind energy into it and we want to perceive something, we precipitate these things through mind. We keep going to school until we graduate, but then we don't stop when we get the job. We keep working. So everything is incremental, right? But there's organization to how plasma finds itself in the universe. And he's going to show you that here without even applying electric current to it at all.
Then we will take a look at how these bowl-shaped magnetic field emitters cause both magnetized and non-magnetized balls to form the amazing arrays shown here. The only thing holding these balls in position are the magnetic fields emanating from these two bowls. Could this truly be the way that atomic and molecular structures are properly explained? I believe so. Let's take a look at the forces at work in the nucleus area of these bowl-shaped magnetic fields. Shown here are ordinary non-magnetized 5mm steel balls. These bowl-shaped magnetic fields induce a magnetic field into each steel ball, which causes them to repel each other while at the same time keeping the balls structured together. So this mysterious force not only causes the steel balls to become packed tightly together, but it also keeps them apart. Then it does this while at the same time forming a geometrically balanced pattern, just as we find within atoms and molecules. Notice the vibration in all of the steel balls as each new ball is added to the nucleus area.
I mean, now the mind starts going in terms of interpersonal dynamics, right? Everything has a boundary. Nothing ever really touches. Everything, if you're the dynamo, if your spine is the magnet, right? And you're moving the magnet, so you're discharging voltage, you're radiating a field. That's your aura. They say they're radiating the light. You could feel somebody else's aura. Auras colliding, but people still have space and boundaries, right? You can't walk through a door. Okay, this is all electromagnetism. And this is really going to start to blow your mind. It's going to get a lot more fun and easygoing here.
Then we will take a look.
Yeah, you keep on saying that.
But look at that. This is where we're going to connect a lot more dots.
I'm having a good time. Listen, I spent so much. I can't tell you how much time I spent playing with like coils and wire and magnets as a child. I was just hooked on that stuff, on all this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
it's like magic to me, and learning how to use it to do things was like magic to me as a child. Still is,
Mm-hmm.
I'm still convinced that
Dense pattern. Just
I think most free energy people are grifters, anytime they ask you for money, especially, but I'm still convinced that somebody might come up with a free energy engine based on magnetism. It's tantalizing, it's incredibly tantalizing.
Based on access to the ether, you mean? We want to be able to tap into, okay, so
Yeah.
Stephen Greer, right? He'll say, that, these craft, these technologies and these secret access projects are using 0-point energy anti-gravitic propulsion. Why he does that is because it sounds more fancy. I was trying to say this before. Again, there's no need to like debunk anything that I'm saying, because what we're doing is we're putting pieces of the puzzle together, and we're not trying to prove I'm not trying to prove that I'm a supporter of groupthink. I mentioned that before. But what I'm showing you, like even right now, look at this pattern. Okay, you see how they're not touching. Remember how he said they perturb each other? Remember what we were discussing about perturbance and electromagnetic fields? Now there aren't even any electrical currents being zapped into this thing. That's because electrical current is always already present. That's just to get the light show, to make your own plasmoid. But the magnetized field that binds all things and also keeps things separate. So cells, even cells, have boundaries to them. Every cell has a boundary. Okay. Wheels within wheels. This is Ezekiel's wheels within wheels. This is why when you dissect an onion, you will see layers within layers within layers, separation, 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 because we're experiencing momentary experience, slice by slice by slice. But it's like a flip book, and we're seeing it at a bit rate, right? Remember, life is a pulse. Okay, positive, you see it. Negative, back to counter space. That's a moment. And it's flickering so quickly that you're seeing the computer screen we're looking at right now is just a plasma thing going back and forth, a little dot, but it's forming an entire picture. Okay, so it's just a little bit more philosophy, but more practicum. Look at this chemical bond. Okay, that's the same shape. And then where that integrates with is also the flower of life. So for instance, like charlatans and stuff, they can create a whole career on saying that they heal people. I channel people. I'll give you the flower. People sell the flower of life pendant. They put jewels and shit in it. But the reality is yeah, it's an ancient symbol. And yeah, it represents the platonic solids. It's probably got all the elements in it. But what's most important is you could see the symmetry. And when you look at it, you can see the dots, like when Ken was talking about the interference points, where if you squint at the screen, you can see the dots where the lines overlay, right? And where those lines overlay, where those dots overlay, you can see that in the microscopy right there. Okay, so what is geometry? Geometry is essentially the force vectors of electrical force in motion. Okay, so if you're going up a roller coaster, people, you meet a point of resistance at the top where you stop. So there was a still point at the bottom, you build up potential energy, and then you reach a point of resistance and you stop. Still point, still point. The rest is exhaustion of energy. When you flush a toilet bowl, you take the stored energy from the water that's already up there, and it seeks its point of least resistance by letting the lever go. The water falls. Okay, cavitation. So loss of energy is not exhaustion, combustion, rockets, gas. That's the one thing that I like Stephen Greer about, and it's really shameful that he just disappoints me, because I've seen him a bunch of times, and he does talk, having secret access projects, it does prevent us from moving forward into these kinds of technologies. And 0 point.
You're right. Yeah. Somebody just said that there's Dr. Stephen Greed ads playing on my show right now.
Oh, God.
Which is hysterical to me. It's, considering my coverage of him. But it is what it is.
Let's corroborate further, because actually, if we take like another 20, 30 minutes, I think we'll be good. So anyway, here you can see the gestation of an embryo. And that's when you're born. It starts as 1, splits into 2. We already saw the video, but look at the arrangement. Okay. It's the same process as the unfolding of the flower of life. If you want to get more into that, again, I could do a whole lecture just on geometries and how these force vectors spiral out from a 0 point out to the periphery, which is surface tension, and they keep spiraling out in that phi ratio to create the pattern. And in this case, it's a human being or a frog or whatever. Here's an embryo, right, or a fetus. There's the phi ratio. There's a spiral galaxy. Again, the phi ratio is the math. We could say we have the math, but in reality, it's a force vector of an electrical arc in force in motion. Okay, this is force in motion. This is creating a magnetic field around it. If this was one spark that lit here, you would see a corkscrew wrapped around this. This would be the electrical current moving through space-time, discharging its voltage, and the magnetic field would reach surface tension parallel to it as it traverses the universe. It's a corkscrew. Okay? Let's remember the corkscrew. And actually, if I move fast now, it will help us to start to gel all these things together. There's the phi ratio embedded onto the topography of a torsion field. It's also why, you know, it looks like an orifice, right? Or a sphincter. I mean, that's why orifices and sphincters and openings like that, cavities. No, that's why they look like that. It's because it's tucked in, because energy is flowing into that, you know.
Unless you've been in prison too long and then it gets tucked out. Yeah.
Yeah. Cymatics, again, I could do a whole presentation on sound, but I just wanted to touch on this. What you're looking at is frequencies.
This stuff is interesting to me too. I like those videos where they play different frequencies and show you the shape of the frequency. Yeah. Very interesting.
Right. So it's like we were looking at the top of a toroid. You know, I can literally put that right on top of one of those cymatic things. Just show you this toy real quick. So imagine this being the 0-point plane of inertia. Okay. And then we don't know what the perturber is, but quantum slit will say, oh, it's a perceiver. Okay, so let's say the first perceiver came in. Go ahead and zoom that in again.
Okay, sorry.
So let's say this is the flat plane, flat Earth, right? But let's say 0-point plane of inertia. You can't even imagine this. It doesn't even exist. But then a perturbance comes in and disturbs this because it has potential energy. This is charge. All the energy in the universe is in this. And then a toroid is formed from that. And there's your structure. And now if you can imagine, let's see if I can mimic this. Now see, this is your spine, the central column, the hyperboloid. And you see how it almost kind of like looks like a muscle belly? Now you see the pinch point? Remember the Z pinches? Pinch point here, okay? Crown chakra or whatever. Electrical voltage coming into your brain, discharging as electrical current down the central nervous system. And literally, that's why I said it's a sphincter. We're being mature here, right? Because food goes in and it comes out your butt. And that sphincter it's basically through peristalsis, I mentioned before. Peristalsis is the inversion of solid to liquid to solid again. It's a polarity process. You're taking food that's solid, chewing it, making it a liquid, which is oppositional, and then it becomes solid again when it mixes with chyme and becomes poop because it has to slow down. And like I said, we're talking about acceleration and inertia. So I should say this at this point.
Read this comment, Joey. That's pretty good. Yeah. I wish
Donovan.
This guy was my science teacher. Thank you, Donovan.
Well, I kind of wish that I did that, but I got into DJing and I wanted to be the cool guy on stage. I did that for 30 years. And in fact, I don't really have any links or anything right now, but I have to say blessing to you because you're inspiring me to begin a new chapter in my life. I'm sort of walking away from DJing and the rave scene. It's kind of toxic. I still produce music, but I want to get more into this kind of stuff because it's my first passion. And so I don't have a channel right now, but if anybody wants to add me on the YouTube right now, you can. I'll probably start if I do decide to do it, I'll start it on this channel before I migrate. But just to wrap up this, cymatics, sounds like a fancy word. What you're looking at, because you already got the education from before, force vectors of sound, electric currents in motion, force in motion, electromagnetism, radiation, sound, light. Okay, sound and light is when energy, charge is exhausted. And so when you tune to different frequencies, which are different oscillations, we can't talk about that now, you get these different patterns. And so essentially, you can think of every toroid as having its own discrete pattern, right? And because you're moving through life as a slideshow, moment by moment by moment, you're constantly changing patterns, right? Just like you could disrupt or just perturb the water. And, we say waves. Oh, we can see the waves. Remember, a wave is not a thing. The torsion model is not a thing. There's a perturbance that reaches a point of maximum, and then it eventually settles. Just like if you stop perturbing the glass, the water settles. Just like you spin the top eventually settles. If you take, any kind of ring, right? Think about this, the mass acceleration. Remember I'm talking about dielectric acceleration? when you want to void that motion, what happens when you spin like a plate, right? It starts slow, wubba, 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 but then it builds up speed, wubba, 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 right? Why does it do that? Acceleration. It's spiraling down and speeding up till it reaches its lowest null point. And so you might not look at spinning a plate as being an electrical event, but it is. In the beginning was the word, sound, vibration. This is how you can make fun of your, your goofy friends when they're like, oh, everything's a vibration. First of all, if you're saying raise your vibration, that's PTSD. You don't want a lot of voltage in your nervous system, okay? That's trauma. I could talk more about that later, but what you want to do, and this is a term we use, it's an electrical term, I feel grounded. You want to take those currents from the brain, the arc of the current, the arc of the covenant, and you want to, those polarized currents, you want them to pass through you. Sound familiar? Sounds like every other spiritual system I've ever heard. Let God show you the way, let the chi flow, right? So the idea being is that the charges start up here in heaven, to earth came. Here's acoustic levitation. And then we'll get into some astrotheosophy.
So if you take an ultrasonic transducer like this and you put a surface above it for it to reflect the sound wave off, you can actually create a standing wave pattern in there. And if you take some small pieces of things like pieces of paper or small pieces of styrofoam, you can stick them in there and they actually levitate in the standing wave. Also, instead of a reflector, we could just put a second transducer up top of it, playing the same wave. And if we do that, we get a little bit stronger levitation. Okay, let's see how many we can fit in here. 1, 2, 3.
So you can't see it, you can't hear it because it's above your hearing level, meaning, I didn't mention this yet, we don't really hear sound. The brain makes you hear sound. If I'm at a club and I feel the bass of the speakers, my body is getting the pulse from the speaker, the pressure, right? Pressure waves of air molecules being vibrated, when in reality they're being perturbed, creating pockets of pressure as a wave that reach my body, and I feel it and my electrical resistance because I'm grounded. I'm a grounded coaxial circuit. I can feel that hit my body. But the sound that we hear in our brain and the emotions that we get from a song that we heard at our wedding, okay, that's where the mystery comes from. Like, where is that stored? That's holographic in a sense because people can all feel the same for the same song. You know, if you sing a song, even just hearing somebody talk, where does it go? Every time I mutter something, it's automatically voided. Even if I repeat myself, it's discrete and unique every single time. Okay? It's a pulse. So you don't have to hear sound in order for it to be a perturber, right? Or for it to be perturbed as vocalization. Like when we speak, we are creating pressure conditions with our mouth cavity, right? We're building up air and we're sculpting our mouth to create different wave foldings, right? With our mouth. I synthesize, okay? It's a long discussion on filters and envelopes and modulation. But what you're doing is you're creating a disturbance in air molecules, which are densely packed. Imagine this, like I said, spheres against spheres, densely packed. Speaking, creating sound, in the beginning was the word, is basically taking that densely packed field and perturbing it to where it oscillates. Just like we were looking in that Primer Fields video, okay? If he shows in another video, if you take that still point and you push one of those BBs through either end of the bulb magnet, positive or negative, it'll come shooting out of that magnet like at the rate of a gun. And that's actually rail guns, right? You can use magnets to shoot projectiles. But he was at the still point, okay? So the idea being is that at that still point, there's so much potential energy that the second it's perturbed, it's off in a trajectory. And that trajectory is called force in motion. Force in motion is magnetism that hugs it back in, and then we see that entire unfolding as a light show. But I was
so
trying
if you take an ultrasonic
trying to talk about sound basically because we think of sound as like, oh, but you got to hear it. No, dogs hear shit that we don't hear. And so sound perturbates the universe and is also, it's a form of radiation. So the objective is understanding that it's still part of the electrical model because analog synthesizers, I should have said that by now, when you take a sine wave, right? So a circle is a sine. A cube is a square wave. A triangle is a triangle wave. Okay? Because it gets, actually, probably could say I don't know enough to maybe explain why that is. But if you have geometries as cubes, you also have sine waves as squares. Because, like I said, the square and the circle are intimately connected as the masculine and the feminine. The square binds all things. It's called rectilinear energy. Like we build houses in the shape of squares to bind things. Whereas the radial prime mover is infinite. It doesn't really go anywhere through Cartesian plots. Cartesian is the geometry of space. When you build your house as a cube, that's Cartesian. It's three-dimensional. It's not black.
Do you think that yeah, I get that sometimes there's similar shapes and symbology from the past, but do you really think that the Egyptian Ankh is depicting an electric oscillator or something like that?
Yeah, let me get to this. I just want to comment on what somebody thinks. Oh my God, this guy thinks we're idiots. Chencha la hueva. So you get stuck between a rock and a hard place when you do things like this, because obviously you're typing in there. You could see there's other people who are also like, this guy sounds psychotic. He doesn't know what he's talking about. So you have to draw the line between how much information do I give people that's too technical to where they zone out, like Steven said. And then I also have to tie it together with stuff that's fun, that's not too technical. So what I learned in my business, because I'm an entrepreneur, you can't make everybody happy. And I'm doing this to basically show you my process. This isn't the end game. This isn't how it is. This is everything that's out there that I've connected throughout the course of my life that corroborates
sure, yeah.
similarities, right? It's all similarities. So let's look at this, right? You got an electrical arc. I've been talking about it as an arc. It's right there in front of you. That's an electric oscillator by Nikola Tesla. You have a positive and a negative dielectric pole, and you have the arcing current between them, okay? And then if you look at an Ankh, arc, and you see the arc, which is actually included into the Christian cross, and there's probably a reason why they took it off of it, because they don't want you to know that probably, but that's a whole other conversation. Again, the grifters, the atomists, the people who want to block conscious evolution. We've all seen the Dendera light bulb. They say it's a flower, but it obviously has, its filament in there. It looks like a bulb, and it's got this same feature as we saw here.
Yeah, and I always thought that was kind of convincing because
it looks like a transformer.
It looks like a light source or a light bulb to me, and there's no char marks. If these people were inside these stone tunnels and everything all the time, there would be torch marks or something.
Right.
There would be some sign of like lamp oil, something. They don't find that inside, but they find a depiction of this, which is interesting.
I think that's a marvelous reproduction. If you guys want, after this, you can look up what a transformer looks like. Like when you look at the poles that carry the lines,
yeah,
you will see this configuration. Again, so I should admit more when I don't know things. I don't know what that is. I think it's a transformer. It could be a transducer. It might actually be a transducer or a capacitor. But this shape, which is evident in the Ankh, okay, right here, the Ankh, apparently they were tapping it. Even in the Bible, it says tap the stone, which relates to, I think it's Jacob that sees pineal, pine cone, right? And the pineal is the major master regulator that secretes the hormones. Well, why does that happen? Because your brain tells it sends a signal to that gland to secrete those hormones. Well, what's that signal? Oh, it's charged particles. It's an electrical current in your brain called a neuron, a synaptic burst. So an electrical burst literally terminates at the point of a receptor cell and secretes a chemical concoction we call a hormone, and then you interpret it as a feeling. And as far as I'm concerned, that's what the sin is. And it's ironic that the sin is the serpent is the brainstem. The brainstem is, the unconscious mind. It's where we store all of our traumas. Like anybody, like for instance, like I'm a very confident person. I don't really become argumentative because like I've consulted a lot of people and I know how these things work, where people have ideas that they hold in. And the more that people like want to keep challenging, but like not have something constructive to say where it's like, this guy sounds like he's on drugs or whatever, is because it's actually something that's maybe disrupting them. And maybe it's good that they get disrupted so that they ask bigger questions. Because I would have never have came to this, and I would have never have had this beautiful moment to meet a community if I didn't take the chance to sacrifice what I think I know. It's actually a lot worse if you think you know. I'm showing what I've come to realize I can corroborate. It's not necessarily what I know because it's always subject to change. But getting practical again, the Baghdad battery. I mean, you can literally generate electricity from a piece of copper. Okay, that's the conductor.
Yeah, so we know for a fact that they had electricity, even if it wasn't, kind of like ours. They had a form of electricity. And they had these batteries that they were doing something. Don't most archaeologists believe that they were using this device for electroplating and jewelry making? Or am I incorrect in that? It's been a while since I've been over the Baghdad battery.
A little etymology on Egypt. Ancient land of Kemet, K-E-M-E-T. Kemet is where we get chemistry. Okay, alchemy, chemistry. Okay, what's chemistry? Working with the inert gases. I listened to a researcher that I really fell in love with on a show. It wasn't George Norrie. He was talking about how he feels like kind of like where I'm at. This is my best work right now of what I really think the pyramids were doing. They were creating plasma using the inert gases to create plasma. And they were using acoustical levitation to maybe build the pyramids. But what he was basically talking about is that those pyramids were maybe plasma generators, but at the least they were creating gases. They were using the inert gases because chemistry, alchemy, and being able to work with the metals in the way that they did, they had to have known a little bit about chemistry to be able to do those conversions. Okay, so if they had and then you have to understand, like what I'm talking about, you should already understand by now that if you understand and can harness the gases, and then you can charge those gases with electrical current, and then we knew that they had electrical current, this Baghdad battery thing, okay? Well, then you obviously can get plasma. Well, then if you can get that, then who's to say they couldn't discover acoustic levitation? I think maybe that Ankh thing was the tapping of the stone bit, where they would tap the stone, and then it would reverse the charge. Because remember, gravity, which keeps the stone heavy, is dielectric inertia. It's the charge that binds the stone through electromagnetism. But if you can inverse it, the charge becomes neutral. It goes back to the 0-point plane of inertia. So you can literally blow on it, and it'll go 1,000,000 miles an hour. I mean, that's essentially how these UFOs are supposed to work. They're not bending space-time. What they're doing is they're reversing the dielectric inertia to create a pocket around the ship that has no resistance. So it could just skim. It's like one of the analogies that they've used is like, take a peach pit, right? Stephen, if you've eaten a peach pit, it's all slippery and it's shaped like that. Again, like the Sombrero Galaxy. You try squeezing onto that peach pit and it's going to keep slipping out of your hands. Again, that's similar to peristalsis. Okay? Squeeze, 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 squeeze. It's kind of like rolling the toothpaste 1 inch at a time where you get those no pressure points. Okay, I jump around a bit, but again, trying to refine the things that I was saying so it doesn't all sound like gobbledygook. More cool images here. I mean, it's a perfect replication of what the ancient Greek forms saw as thunderbolts, as cosmic discharge in the sky. And what you're seeing is electrical discharge in a plasma chamber.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And I'm not sure if we can finish. I would like to finish. It might take just maybe another 10 minutes because I didn't even introduce Thunderbirds and how it all ties into the mythological world.
Yeah, go ahead, but we've got to try to motor through it.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll give myself at the most another 20 minutes. All right, so we're talking about thunderbolts in the ancient sky, very violent skies, plasma discharge between charged bodies, donating their voltage, discharging their voltage off of one another. And this is where the Thunderbolts project came from. David Talbot, right here, he's the guy that gets more into the mythos, which I prefer. It's more fun. Wallace Thornhill is the scientist. And like I said, he does talk about electrons. He does talk about gravity. He doesn't say gravity is dielectric inertia. He might say that sometimes, but he's actually just passed. But he was working to try to get, more of this information, mostly about the gravity issue. So if you want to walk away with some real information, that's a real issue that you can continue researching. Number one, gravity as dielectric inertia as a property of electrical field propagation rather than a separate fundamental force. Okay, all the forces are aesthetics to electric current. Number two is the perturbing of cosmic bodies. Electromagnetic fields that radiate charged bodies also find their nullest pressure point. So they don't attract to each other. They're actually trying to discharge their voltage, which means they're trying to go back to zero. So they cancel each other out at their lowest null pressure gradient, i.e. black holes, right? So a black hole is a null pressure gradient, is a null pressure 0 point, okay? The null pressure gradient is the sun going back into the black hole. So if a sun radiates voltage, that radiation runs out because the sun's a battery. So when you discharge voltage, capacitance, you lose capacitance, and you have space. But with more space, more magnetism, more toroidal, bigger the toroid, the bigger the space, the less voltage you have. More voltage at the knot of the bridge. You lose all that voltage when you jump off the bridge. But when you reach that 0 point, when the bungee cord stops, you know, equal in proportion to the rate of the weight of your body, right? However that needs to reach that point, it has to void that motion by returning back to the bridge. In fact, it'll be a pulse though. Let's be really honest. It'll go ba-boom, 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 until you stop, and then they pull you up. What did I say before about the plate, right? Spin the plate. Wubba, 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 wubba. It stops, right? 0 point. Well, bungee cord, slow, right? And it picks up inertia and then da-da, 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 da-da. You know, what about when you die? It's like ba-ba, ba-ba, right? The flat line that you're hooked up to is the 0 point inertia, right? So when the chi, the prana, again, 12 voltage, moving through your body, your spine is carrying it through the cerebral spinal fluid. I'm kind of jumping ahead because I wanted to get there and I don't think I will. I think we might have to wrap up with David Talbot. And then I got one more thing with with the orbs and the UFOs. But here's a presentation he did at Convergence. Talks about how he met Wallace Thornhill and how they started converging on the mythological archetypes, the symbols, and how they actually relate, electrically speaking, to what the ancient people were seeing in the skies. And they anthropomorphized those interactions, meaning, like cartoons act like people, the planets are the gods, and the voltage activity that was happening was the interplay that they narrated, and that's pretty much what became our culture.
Talk about a convergence of myth and science, which has already been acknowledged by David Novak. And this occurred primarily when in the 1990s, mid-90s, I had the privilege of meeting Wal Thornhill, and he stated to me how electric phenomena would create the forms that I had reconstructed. That led just a few years later to a convergence in 2000 with Tony Peratt, again, a leading plasma scientist in his time. And this meeting with Tony Peratt was an astounding juncture for us. He had identified is that embedded cone form seen? I'm not able to see it from this angle. Are you able to see the green? Oh dear. Okay. Well, what he called the Christmas tree, I identified as the chain of arrows, and that set in motion one of the most memorable conversations in my life. And he asked me how that configuration evolved, and I described a filament up the polar axis that divided into a stack of toruses, first in conic embedded cones form, and then a flat toruses that were seen as the tower or ladder of the sky. When Tony returned to Los Alamos, he asked me to send him the rock art. And instead of sending him hundreds of rock art images, I just sent him this one. Now, the reason I sent him just one was I was certain that IMASC form, that's what we call it below, it's a global image. I was certain that it was a plasma form, and that the ladder of heaven I had identified as toruses. And he had said that's the evolution of the Pratt instability in the laboratory, an intimate connection with the chain of arrows or the Christmas tree form. So I was confident that when he saw that, he would recognize it as.
Hey, does that look familiar? Right? The eye mask. He even says that it looks like an owl, and he will show you plasma discharge. That's called Pratt instability. That's, as you can see, the field lines. You can see the two poles, the electric and the dielectric. You can see the magnetic field lines, wheels within wheels, layers within layers, rings within rings, and they're all propagating out to surface tension, coiling back into themselves as indicated by these two pinch points, right? This is the pinch point in the middle, and you can see it's curving in here, dielectric inertia back to its 0 point, and then radiating back out. But you see how it looks like a phase? So why do you think there's bisymmetry with a fulcrum in the middle? Why do you think we have two eyes? You see? Because polarity and the wave, bisymmetry is an effect of, again, so we call it electricity. I should just say, we don't really know what the F it is, people. We can control it. We can harness it. We can generate it through other means like coal, right? And we could step down its voltage to be used in, say, a boom box. But we don't know where it comes from if you're just an atomist, if you're an atomist grifter. If you incorporate the field, you know that the static electric field is everywhere, or I should say the static neutral field of ether is everywhere, and that you could take any point in that dot matrix that's densely packed and create a universe or create a moment, just whatever. So that's how, I'm just saying, facial structures, it even looks kind of alien, and he'll get into like the masks. So for instance, hey, let's debunk some shit right now. The grifters at the UFO conferences that bring up all these masks and shit. The reason why I like Electrical Universe, especially what David Talbot brings to the picture, is because all those masks and stuff that look like aliens, they're not aliens. It's plasma formation in the sky. They basically, our ancient ancestors utilized they invented anthropomorphism. Like I said, giving events that they couldn't make sense of human qualities. So that obviously looks like a face. And isn't that the beauty and the magic of it all? Because we're made of electrical currents and the universe is made of electrical currents. So the patterns are similar to how we look. Our body is a pattern. It's being generated by the same system. So they're looking up at the sky and they're seeing a goddamn face, right? And it looks like an alien. And he even says an owl. Let's finish this up.
As a plasma form. And he even identified the parts.
DMT, yeah.
And then he sent me this very unique plasma form, and that is the eye mask form that I just referred to. And the eye mask will be found on virtually every continent. It has no meaning, no explanation in any conventional terms. And yet it is the explanation for the owl-eyed form of the mother goddess, and for the owl-eyed or eye mask form carved on stone around the world and enigmatically connected to the stairway to the sky. That eye mask beneath those toroidal forms of the Kayenta pictograph is just a variation on this. And incidentally, there's no up and down in this configuration. This is actually a phase of wandering. It's not a polar configuration. That eye mask form was seen at Easter Island. It had a lot of aquatic elements attached to it because it just rose right up out of the surrounding sea. So
now I want to connect something here in real time, people. So he's talking about this, think of Aurora Borealis, okay? Same phenomenon. Now, there's ocean there. And imagine in primal times, your ancient Africans. Anybody remember the Dogon? Remember how the Dogon saw fish people? Remember how they saw fish people pop up out of the ocean and give them information? Okay, so if the ocean is here and you see this alien-like thing, which is really radiant bodies discharging their voltage in a toroidal arrangement, in a relationship rather, in an electrical polarized relationship. They're discharging their voltage. They're creating this pattern. This is the stairway to heaven. And you reach the owl. So when you look at those ancient pictographs, they might say ancient theorists proclaim that these are aliens. No, it's not an owl alien. It's actually a plasmatic discharge that resembles a face because of the polar relationship. The bisymmetry kind of looks like, the electrical discharge event kind of looks like a face. And so then they anthropomorphize that to make sense of that. So when they would see this thing come up and over, like awe, right? Awe inspired. Okay, awe, opening up the throat chakra and saying, they would open literally, because this is how I think also too. I'm very deep into the human condition and how we got here. And it's all very beautiful. It's a very poetic thing. But like I said, the body, it opens up. You're like a closed fist, like a fetus. And then you expose yourself to all the volatility in the world. You leave the cave, which is the 0 point. You go out into the world and you fight tigers and you return back to the cave before they even knew what sexuality and pregnancy was. I mean, think about how crazy that was. That dynamic to be able to go out and then come back, go out and come back, right, is an electrical event, you know, to protect the 0 point fulcrum of the future, what would be the stereotypical nuclear family and home where the wife, as the still point provider, the radial prime mover, stays home and the husband goes out and works and comes home, regardless of whether or not you agree with that. But that dynamic, okay, and there's even, it's like that in really every household. You'll have someone who takes care of the home, is a bit more masculine, and then the other person goes out and does the thing and comes home and takes care of the shit. You know, it's these relationships are embedded in everything that we do. There's a bit, I want to make this a bit more connected with the UFO thing before we leave, because that would make it more fun and it'll tie it into the community a bit. I wanted to go over the serpent. How much more time do you want to spend, Stephen? Because I don't want to.
Well, we're 20 minutes over the 90 already, so yeah,
Okay.
I don't know how much longer you want to go. But
Well, it's not really up to me because I could do it for days, but how much longer you want to give me?
yeah, I mean, you know, I it's up to you. I mean, you know, I'm here, but like, you know, there's a saying that you always want to leave the audience wanting more.
Right. Yeah. All right.
There's
So
a lot of this is just, there's so much, you know, information that this is the kind of podcast where somebody can't just listen through. They got to like stop, think about it, or maybe
Right.
look things up, like these big words and things. You know, it's fine though. How much more do you have?
right. Well, I wanted to get into the archetypes, to get into the reason for the archetype of the serpent. And I won't show the video. I can more so freestyle that. But the serpent iconography is very important. First of all, when we think of like the gods and how they represent the planets, think of Zeus. Okay, he throws the lightning bolt down. Remember downward causation, planting the seed? The idea comes down from heaven. So that heavenly aspect is the ether, full potential. And when Zeus throws the lightning bolt down, and you become awe, open the throat chakra, you look up to the sky, you become inspired. In inception, spire, the spire, like the sword pierces. All these things are connected. So when we pierce the universe, we're seeking information to draw more information in, to understand more about the system that we're in and a part of. And we become more awe-inspired to realize that we are a part of that. Now, the serpent it can hold many connotations, but for the most part, like Talbot was explaining, it represents electrical current or plasma discharge. We're going to get into the caduceus, how the serpent represents the coiled serpent, right? The Berkeland current. It also represents, like he was talking about, these embedded plasma toroids, which are actually represented ancient as the stairway to heaven. So the stairway to heaven is a stack of toroids, like they saw in that Pratt instability in ancient times off the coast of that island on Easter Island. I also mentioned it's on the caduceus or staff of Hermes. And you can also look at the serpents as part of the chakra system or even the acupuncture meridians, right? The idea is that the serpent represents electrical current as it propagates through the body, and it's coiled like the Berkeland current. And now I'm going to make that practical, and we'll make that the wrap. I'm going to breeze through this. Dr. Randolph Stone, he's the guy for me. As a therapist, I learned polarity therapy, but what he did was he combined the Eastern and Western traditions, yoga, Ayurvedic, Chinese Taoist, and he, like me, he's like my greatest inspiration. He noticed that they were all the same. They were all talking about this current that moves through the body. And so we already talked about this, but the idea is that the 0 point fulcrum is in the center. Charges radiate out from the center and they slow down until they meet a point of resistance. There's your onion. And that's the pump. And these are his diagrams. So here's the caduceus, but more from a more appropriate perspective in terms of electrical schematic. So literally the eagle represents looking up above heaven. You could see more about what's going on downstairs when you're up above. But the serpent represents bondage to the earth, which you're stuck on. But there's strengths between two of these. And if you can marry them both in the brain, you become, you know, a better human. The idea is that you want to have oversight over your life, but you don't want to have your head in the clouds. You need to be grounded, which means you need to allow the arcing current or the supersonic, ultrasonic energy, which he calls it, the electrical current, you need to allow that to pass through you and be grounded so that you get another fresh intake of information. And this is what's called the biofield. These are the energy fields that the acupuncturists work on. Acupuncturists are recognized by the Department of Health. Insurance covers acupuncture now. They've actually used dye and they've analyzed these subtle fields.
Yeah, I was surprised. I was surprised to find out that my health insurance covers all kinds of things like holistic medicine and acupuncture, and you know, I wasn't never aware of that. You know.
Yeah, you always got to ask because things are evolving too. I mean, see, here's the thing. That's what's
I mean, it depends. It depends on your medical insurance. But mine, for example, you can get like massages and massage therapy, even if nothing's wrong with you. If you have a good enough health plan, that's cool.
Find out what you're allocated, because you might actually be allocated. Because I did medical massage for a while, and I would get clients where the hospital would pay me a lump sum, and it was always a reduced price of what I would normally charge. It was actually a ripoff. I did it to help people, to be honest. But you know, I would get a guy that would come in, and he would be approved for 10 massages to work on his rotator cuff, right? So you should find out, and you might actually even be able to come up with an excuse just to get massages, like to balance your body. It's so good for you. But here, let's get practical. So, like I said, we're looking at the caduceus. This one over here. Okay, there's your Z-pinch. That's a chakra. So when we were talking about Berkeland currents, we were talking about the neuter still point dielectric pole. That is where a chakra would be. A chakra is just a symbol to represent the dielectric neuter pole, or the dielectric pole, or the 0 point, or a source point, where all these energies propagate and return back to. And these charges reverse their charge as they come down. So it's discharging voltage through your central nervous system. Cerebral spinal fluid carries these charges from the brain, CSF. It's electrically charged fluid, and your brain is literally bathed in it. Okay, so imagine electrical bursts of light going through your central spinal column. I mean, that's literally what's happening. But here's an electrical diagram version of it. So to the left, this is a good wrap up. Let's just, you know, simplify toroidal dynamics. In the beginning was the word. So there was a pulse from 0 point. Okay, it came out of the ether, and then it has to meet a point of resistance in polarity, positive and negative. This is the point of resistance or completion. And then it has to void itself back. This would be dielectric inertia. So mass acceleration from 0 point, mass acceleration towards mass, towards resistance, electromagnetism, light show, and then return back to 0 point, dielectric inertia, which voids that wave, which voids that pattern. And it's voiding the pattern and creating a new one instantaneously and blinking so quickly that you literally see my hand still like that. But it's literally blinking in and out of reality. That's why God's machine is so brilliant, or whatever, this hologram that we're in, because you can't have things that are stuck. You can't have attraction. You get a swamp. You're 90% water. Water has to move. Bruce Lee said, be like water. And this is, again, here you go, stacked toroids. I mean, you got David Talbot talking about stacked toroids, and you got the caduceus showing these pinch points. And you look at Berkeland currents, and you see the pinch points, and you see the surface tension, right? So this is the electrical schematic of how the serpents, right? They're no longer serpents anymore. This is what you do. This is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to help people make this stuff practical. So when you're at a yoga party and people are talking about chakras and kundalini and serpents and all this kind of crazy shit, you could say, oh yeah, that's just really electrical currents propagating through your body from the top down. It's that simple, you know? Like, and that's kind of why I do it, because I like finding peace of mind through simplicity. But this is essentially how it moves from air, like I said, the ether, the gas. Where's the seedling before it appears? Then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the seedling appears on the tree. It reaches surface tension. We say it's ripe. That's 50% of its life cycle. That would be the first peak of the wave. Then it enters the death cycle. It enters the trough. Gravitation, i.e. dielectric inertia, has to void the mass of that object. It falls. Why does it fall? Because it's going towards its lower null pressure gradient. The center of the Earth, the 0 point fulcrum of the Earth, the point source center of the Earth, right? So 0 point of the Earth, we exist at surface tension, at the edge of the Earth. Think about this, goosebump moment. You begin as a sphere, as an ovum, okay? What happens is you get electrical charges like the sun, like people, right? We exist at the edge of the sphere. Spermatozoa, they start coming in from the outside, right? Imagine that's a planet and there's space. Ovum, planet, okay? Spermatozoa come and they surround this ovum, just like people do on a freaking planet. One of them gets in, and then in opposition to going in, it comes out. Person comes out. That's the electrical pump. So we literally start as a sphere inside of a pouch, okay? Compartmentalized areas that have boundaries. Wave fields have a boundary. Guts, your heart has a boundary. They're actually all sacs and pouches and tubes. And they're all pressure-mediated conditions, yeah? Digestion, pressure, squeezing, pushing, inversion, solid, liquid, solid, liquid. Okay, jumping around like that, but you could see, when you pull all that in, it starts to paint a picture and you can feel it. I get what he's saying. It doesn't all have to make sense. Not everything is like math, right? But again, to be more practical, these are what he calls the zone, right? So the electrical zones in the body. If you have the neutered pole of the chest, okay? The chest is the solar plexus. We present our chest to the world. We don't walk into the world scared like this. That's depression. You want to be radiant. So you expose yourself and you open yourself up to attacks. That's a risk, okay? Now, when you have the neuter pole of the chest, which is represented by fire, it's what you put into the world. It's how you discharge energy. What is the positive pole of the solar plexus? It's indicated here as the thighs. Why is that? Because we discharge voltage through our limbs, okay? You go to work, you lift things, whatever. So the neuter pole here is the chest, which discharges in its active electromagnetic phase as voltage propagating in the legs or the arms, here, the hands, you can see, as voltage, as energy being discharged. Now, what's the dielectric? What's feeding it? Your thoughts. Okay, so, and in this other image here, he refers to these as ovals. Again, these are your stacked toroids, your stacked pressure conditions. I want you to notice the head is a capsule. Here's a Z-pinch. I want you to notice how it tucks in, okay? There's a Z-pinch here. Then you have the oval of the abdomen. If you've ever gone to art school, you know this is a separate oval. Notice how it pinches in at the waist. That's the navel. That's a Z-pinch. Air fuels fire, okay? Fire in its discharge phase is in the limbs. Now, why is this important from a healing standpoint? Because I worked with clients in this way. Someone would come in with like say a fire imbalance. This is actually very common. Most of you have this. Fire imbalance is you got an overabundance of air. This is Chinese Taoism. This is acupuncture, Chinese medicine. This is real shit. You come in with overwhelming thoughts. That's an overabundance of air. You got to get grounded. Like some people said in the chat room, right? It's like, yeah, I got a lot of ideas. Trust me, I got anxiety. Just like everybody else, I got to ground myself too. This stuff drives me crazy. A lot of people don't pay attention to me. I feel very lonely. You know, that's why I'm so happy to have found Steve and to find you guys, because it is very lonely, you know, to be like a, you know, Renaissance man in a world where everybody likes everything to be rectilinear. They like their phones and, you know, things that taste good. The world of sensation is the world of electricity. The universe of mind is the still point fulcrum. And that's what actually will, well, nervous system. Again, here's a human nervous system. Inverted, it's the branches to a tree. So the brain is the seed. There's the inversion. So if trees are rooted in the ground, remember the spermatozoa coming from outside of nowhere? Well, if we're on the planet, we came from the outside of nowhere, and we're on Truthseekers, and we talk about aliens and shit all the time. Panspermia, comets may have came like the spermatozoa. So the archetype, as above, so below. a comet delivering information from outside the solar system to create life on this planet that inserts into the planet like a spermatozoa is a fractal or the same as a spermatozoa, as above, so below. These are all the fractal scales. Human nervous system, branches of a tree, and it looks like lightning. And there's a tree structure. This is your Z-pinch. Here's it dielectrically grounding itself out, no movement. And this is radiation. The tree's going to die. Look at the canopy. The canopy splays out just like a waterfall. If you saw a whale spout water, it would create this canopy, right? Just like the torsion field. Like we said, the sphincter shape. It comes out like from a squeezed point, and then it envelopes out. That's why the canopy looks like that. As a polarity relationship to the lungs, as an inversion to carbon dioxide is oxygen. You will see an electrical relationship if you drew the field lines. The tree is emitting waves. Waves don't exist, but it's emitting waves of the electrical equivalent of what we call oxygen, right? Off the canopy. And it enters into your mouth. And then the lungs are actually inverted to a tree. The brachioli look like the roots. The brachioli go like this, right? The tree grows like that. It grows like that. Upward causation, right? From surface tension, the edge of the planet, upward causation, growth, downward causation, return to 0 point death. Life cycle, the pump, okay? But your brachioli in your lungs are literally an inverted structure to the roots of the tree because they are in a harmonious polar electrical relationship. The electrons around the nucleus of a oxygen molecule or whatever, right? Let the scientists explain that. It's going through a half-life. That voltage has to discharge. Where does it discharge? In your lungs. And then when you breathe out, your lungs make that electrical conversion and send it back out so that the tree canopy can suck it back in. Think of a tree as a spine line, just a spine, dielectric pole. It takes ether and pulls it in, and it literally expels gravity out of its canopy. Expels oxygen out of its canopy so that it can flow without resistance. We breathe it in. We don't force our breath. It happens autonomically by the reptilian, the serpent, brain stem. Walter Russell, he wrote The Secret of Light. We seemingly live in two universes, the still cosmic mind universe of knowing and the moving thought of mind rhythmic wave universe of sensing. We cannot sense the cosmic universe of God's knowing, nor can we know the thought wave universe of God's thinking. The cosmic mind universe of the one light, the fulcrum, okay, of all knowing is all that is. Everything leaves from it and comes back to it. Sensation is merely seeming. It's an electrical propagation. It's not the standing columnar wave, right? The sine before it becomes a sine in perpetuity. That's your suffering. The Ouroboros, or the serpent eating its own tail, basically. So we must know that this forever creating universe, which seems so real, is but a cosmic cinema conceived by the master playwright. Again, he leaves space for the creator. That's why I like Walter Russell. Okay? You got to back off the map sometimes and get a feeling. You have to be human. You're alive. You're squishy. We don't have to make sense of everything. We could take things as they come and be wrestled by it. We could be perturbed by it. But he talks about how the electrically projected spectrum colored light and sound wave motion picture play of cause and effect is merely thrown on the black screen of imagined space and time. More appropriately, it's projected through or carried through the medium of the ether. And the ether is where we get Ishtar. Ishtar is where we get Easter. Easter is where we get the feminine name Esther. Why is that? Because it represents fertility. Ishtar is the fertile goddess. Ishtar is where we get Easter, resurrection of the Christ. The Christ is the christening when you raise your hormones, referred to as a sacred secretion. I could do a whole lecture on this. When you enter the house of the Lord, where you balance those hormones. Wouldn't you believe it? The hormones is the whore in the Bible. I'll give you one story as a theosophical spiritual testament, and then maybe we can even take questions. The story of it's the prostitute and the husband. I think it's Hosea and Gomer. So Gomer is the wife who becomes a prostitute. Hosea is the husband's at home. Hosea represents the knot at the bridge. He represents the the stationary source point. Okay, he's the fulcrum. He doesn't leave the house. The wife, Gomer, she keeps leaving the house. And he's like, what's the deal with this? My wife's, in the original word was whore, not prostitute. They softened it up, but it has to be whore because it's the hormone. We're not talking about a relationship here. She keeps leaving. God comes in. That's the higher house saying, go get your wife. He goes, why would I do that? She's a whore. Just go get it. So he brings her back to the higher house. Okay. She does it again and again and again and again. That's the procession of the toroid, wheels within wheels, moment by moment by moment by moment. You have to keep correcting your mind. So when God comes in, it's not a guy in the clouds saying, go get your prostitute wife and return her back home because that's the right thing to do. Sometimes people take things literally and they get into toxic relationships. That's why I teach this stuff, because I use this stuff to embed into teaching people about having better interpersonal dynamics. And that's what this is going to evolve into for me, maybe at some point when I'm not afraid to do so. But the idea being is that God, his influence, okay, Noah's Ark, the spark, the Ark of the Covenant, God's telling him again. It's intuition. I'm into it. I'm into it. I'm into this. What are you into? The charge, right? I'm charged up, man. Well, that has to go somewhere. Well, where's it going to go? It's going to go towards realigning your mind. So when you have bad thoughts, I'll bring in Mary. Mary was a whore. Again, the whore, the word whore, hormone. When Mary was a whore, she wasn't sitting with Jesus Christ at the right side of the Father. The right side of the Father is the right side of the brain. When you raise the path, the 33 vertebra, the 33 years of Jesus Christ, the christening happens when you crucify yourself in Calvary. Are you ready for a goosebump moment? Okay, because I'm wrapping it up. Calvary in Latin is defined as skull. You crucify yourself in your skull when you sit still and you become the dielectric neuter pole, and you allow uncomfortable feelings to pass through you without judgment, without sin. The sine wave, the sensory interpretive mechanism. And that is controlled by your reptilian brain stem automatically. So, practically speaking, when your brain makes electrical charges, those charges got to go somewhere. They got to be complete. Okay? They got to be voided. They have to be done with. It has to be a feeling. You have to make sense of it. And then it has to be categorized. And then it goes back to the field. It goes in your brain. We don't know that part. It's a memory. Okay? So that whole process is interpreted by your subconscious. You have about 10% to leverage those mirror neurons in the brain, in the higher house, in the cavern or the cave or the cavitation, the capsule, okay, the cerebellum, the two halves of the brain are the cherubim. Okay, so when you tap that stone, you get a better balance of vasopressin, serotonin, oxytocin. Again, these are all electrical, have an electrical charge to them, but they're fluids, you know, the river of life. The Egyptians had the tear. The cerebral spinal fluid carries these, it's like a concoction. Your thymus gland is responsible for making these concoctions, the drugstore in your body. If you suffer from addiction, you know, I'm still vaping or whatever, I do cannabis periodically. Addiction is actually an addiction to the recombination of the chemicals in your body. Remember Kemet, electrically charged, you know, chemicals. The chemistry is happening in your body. It isn't the drug that you're addicted to. It's the way that it disrupts the normal homeostasis of the flow in your body that you're attracted to. And typically we're using that to get away from something, and we want to enter into cause or effect and just surround ourselves with sensation. What Walter Russell is telling us as we wrap up here is, how do we make this practical in our lives? What's the practicum here? Okay, all this might be true and correct, Joey. Some of it I don't get. I don't understand science. Maybe you're talking too fast. Well, here's the takeaway. If you start to adopt some of these dynamics and you start to understand them philosophically by way of imagining that you're the fulcrum. Imagine you're the Buddhist monk being still, but you're walking around in the mall. Imagine you're at your work and your job and you're working, but you are actually in your being, you are the still point fulcrum. When cause and effect starts to happen and show up in your life, you will find that you will gain resilience and you will no longer have to adopt the idea right, that the brainstem, the serpent, is tempting you to interpret. Therefore, that chemical response will not propagate your nervous system. You have anxiety, you have depression, because the reptilian brainstem has not been slayed. So an archetype to that and the mythology is the hero or the warrior's journey. We can get more into that another time. That's more about the archetypes. That's more David Talbot shit. But the idea being is that you're a warrior. And you were born into a body, a pressure condition. You're inside this body. You can't get out of it. There's boundaries. There's rules, right? And you weren't given a manual. So you have to do your best with allowing things to show up without, allowing damage to the vessel that you got here, right? So we can allow ourselves, to open up, but then we have to take rest and recharge. We go back out again. We open up, blossom like a flower, and then we recharge. That's the life breath. That's the pump. Okay? That's why the heart has a pulse. It's redistributing pressure. And we want to, a simple analogy would be if you're a boat and it starts to get rocky, you want to go with it, right? You want to roll with it, baby. And that's kind of the idea, is that I mentioned in one of our other shows, I don't know if we had the panel or not, but the idea is to not try to hook into everything that your brainstem is telling you, because that's literally just an electrical burst in your brain going off. And if you understand that another one will go off right after it, you can let it pass. And so that entire cascade from the top down through the chakras, where that voltage, like the plate, has the slowest pulse so that you become grounded. Forget about going through that noise. You become more consciously aware of how you are responsible for interpreting cause and effect. And to bring it all the way back to the beginning, and this is the wrap, for real, cause and effect is polarity. Polarity is positive and negative. Positive is the release of charge. It's the exhaustion of energy. It's the positive pole of the battery. And the negative is the dielectric. It's the return to charge. It's the loss of space. It's the death cycle. So isn't that ironic that in opposition, we think that life is where we're living. We want to keep this top spinning. So we keep sustaining gestures and we keep eating food and breathing oxygen to keep ourselves along until dielectric inertia holds sway and returns us back to the 0 point, gravity of center of the earth, and we get buried, right? But all this while, as these currents are discharging through our body, it's up to us to be able to, create a fun light show, right? If we're going to be a battery, if we're just going to be a battery where that's what I'm saying. I used to tell my clients, fuck all that noise. You know that you're discharging voltage. So you might as well just let it happen, right? Like imagine if you had the idea, oh, I can't be a husband and have an autistic son and then also do a show because I won't be able to do all of those things. Then when I was a massage therapist, I can't afford an office. I got an office within 3 months because I allowed myself to go dielectric. Okay, so meditation is basically the same as the dielectric. You allow yourself to implode. You're not getting up and doing things and working hard. This isn't Nike, just do it. That's radiation. That's burning calories. That's loss of energy. Going to a job and giving away your dream. You've allowed yourself to generate waves of feelings that perturbate your body and then now perturbate the world because you're sending them out. And then that caught me. And then I got in your net, and now in opposition, I'm coming into your field, right? So I love it. It's there's something about this. All these words don't necessarily even have to make sense, but it's the feeling characteristic of the pump of life. And it's this state of allowance that we will discover in the future. Victor Schauberger, cavitation, implosion. Walter Russell will talk about explosive devices. They destroy the world. Rockets, missiles, bombs, combustion. So when we discover implosion, when we discover cavitation, when we discover the power of allowing people to be who they are and not judging based on our electrical thinking, we will have more pleasurable experiences here. But it's all evolution, and there's no judgment because, we're all innocent. This is all like you said the other day, right? And I'll wrap up here. You can now talk. You mentioned Bill Hicks. And what is a roller coaster? Like a dragon. It's a wave. So you have to have a crest to feed the trough. And then the inertia from the trough feeds the crest. So isn't that a perfect graph? It looks like a dragon. It looks like a wave. The inertia, right? Because a roller coaster doesn't have an engine. You got to let yourself take that first drop. You have to let yourself go dielectric. You have to say, fuck the idea I have in my head. I'm going to go on the show tonight and I'm going to talk about this wacky shit. And maybe I might meet some friends along the way. And I think you're awesome, dude. I mean, honestly, I've met so much resistance. There's that term, electrical resistance, in the electronic music community. I was in it for 30 years. I have records out in England. I've caught so much flack because just people are jealous and all this kind of stuff. And I connected with you so easily. And I didn't even expect this to happen this rapidly. I kind of knew in my mind's eye that something like this was going to happen because I was reaching for another community. So in closing, I just want to say I appreciate everybody being here tonight. I have a pleasure of meeting all of you, some of you in the Discord. Go ahead and add me on the YouTube. But like I said, I don't really have any channels for this right now. I can maybe share my links to my music. But like I said, right now, that's kind of on a hiatus. So this is all really experimental for me too, you know? And I'm just glad to share my heart space with you and these philosophies. And you don't have to adopt all of these. These are points. These are pinch points, right? These are Z pinches along your peristalsis line. You know, you're moving through space-time and you get irked by some of the things I say. You got to, you know what? I need to look that up. That is exactly what the fulcrum is, living the fulcrum, because when that comes up inside of you, you should then become electric and then follow that thread. You should then discharge and then go into that. Start discharging some energy and find that. And then message me on Discord and be like, yo, I found this out, but you were wrong about this, and maybe it's this. And I could be like, oh, shit, you're right. That's awesome. Okay, so that's what it's all about. It's all about letting go. And I would love to come back anytime. And Steve, take it away, bro.
Okay, so are you done with the screen share then?
Yeah, I think we're done. That's enough for tonight. That was a lot of information, bro.
Yeah, we're like, well, I don't know. Yeah, we're like 2 hours and 20 minutes. So yeah. So I mean, I understand the science side of it more, but when you start merging all this other stuff and chakras, I start kind of zoning out because, I mean, I guess there's a connection there somehow, or ancient peoples probably believe there was, right?
Well, so let me clarify. The reason why I bring up the chakras and the spiritual archetypes and the caduceus, like there's no such thing as a serpent, right? There's no such thing as a chakra. So instead of getting overwhelmed by having to think about what chakras are, right? Because they are not. They are a guide. What I did is I showed what they guide you to. So if, like, let's say, for instance, hypothetically, you understood everything I said, and you're in my body and brain now, and you are current with where I'm at. Again, there's that word, current, the etymology, current, currency. What's current? The mother, the matter. What's the matter, right? So here we are, and I'm saying you no longer have to worry about thinking about what chakras are. You don't have to read about Ezekiel's wheels within wheels and think that that's what alien ships look like. All that stuff. We looked at the plasma discharge, the Peratt instability, right? It's not that these were masks of alien beings and now we have to go off on a trajectory and waste our fucking time thinking about. I mean, I was on a podcast the other day where this guy was talking about how clowns, that the Anunnaki were literally fucking clowns. And that's where we get, I mean, it could be the archetype of the clown, but that's how they looked like. And they were clown-like beings. And then he was talking about how the giants became mountains, petrified mountains. That's what I'm talking about is wrong. That's conjecture. What I'm saying is if you look at the chakras, you can now eliminate the chakras. You could satisfy. If the chakras were a mathematical formula, I solved the chakras by saying they are an entry point into understanding what dielectric poles are. So if you keep it all within the electrical system, you understand that magnetism is the same as electrical current. It's just a part of electric currents when they're propagating as a charge. So the magnetism is the field of space, but that space collapses in on itself. Here's a very easy analogy, right? Just real easy. How does God create pattern units of life? One pattern unit of life, one cell. Take a balloon. The balloon doesn't exist. Take one point in the matrix and then say, I want that to be a balloon. Now you have a balloon. Blow the balloon. What happens? The balloon blows up. You can't keep blowing up the balloon forever. it reaches a point of resistance. Okay? That's the maximum. That's the pattern. Now the pattern is complete. Okay? But the pattern doesn't really exist. It's seeming. Walter Russell will say it's seemingly appearing as a wave extension of your electrical thinking. So when you think something and you feel it, it perturbs the universe with those feelings. And then what comes back is potentiality of, because it's like throwing a fishing line out and then it coming back. Because remember, the bungee cord, self-sustainable system. So it's not complicated in the sense that I'm eliminating things. You don't have to think about the chakras in addition to what I'm saying. I'm saying that now you know that the chakras aren't real. They do represent the endocrine glands. And the endocrine glands are responsible for certain hormones. And that's what I was saying before.
I don't have a problem with people believing in chakras or whatever, but there's an awful lot of grifters out there, and chakras are part of the, a lot. You know how many times I've saw a new age person that offers a $150 I'll align your chakras, and that kind of stuff I don't like, because it's kind of like, can you show me like on a MRI that my chakras are out of alignment, and then after I give you the $150, show me another scan where now they're aligned? And they can't. So I just kind of zone out to that stuff.
I'm glad you brought that up. And I want the room to hear this, because this is Truthseekers and we're anti-bullshit. So I went through that path where I thought that I can heal people with my hands, but I'm also very authentic, and my path work is about scrutiny and finding and corroborating evidence to make this journey worthwhile. I don't want to be sucked into bullshit. That's what the music scene did to me. So I could, if I've consulted people and I've done that work. I could have done that today. I could have prepared a website. I could have had a landing page, and maybe some of the people that I could have impressed, I could do like Skype readings. Like even on TikTok, there are people that give Reiki over the thing. They say they give Reiki or give you a reading or some shit like that. Oh, yesterday, I'll tie this in. Yesterday you were talking, why don't we just like do the grift for 30 days and then see like, right? So like, for instance, like I before I knew that I would have been grifting, I was doing that. I got a tip once from a woman I did an hour Reiki session with. She gave me $100 tip just because it brought up so much information for her that it caused her to divorce her husband, literally, because she discovered things from that. It's crazy. So there are mystical experiences that happen. I'm one of the legit ones. Like I said, I could have done that, but I didn't, because not only am I not in practice, but I've moved on, because I'm not a grifter. I'm not hanging out in that space. Let me tell you, I went to a meditation class once in Los Angeles and I got cursed out, because they were doing an open-eyed meditation and they were telling you to keep your eyes open. And I started laughing in my mind while they were all meditating, because I was like, these people are going to start tripping out because they're dilating their pupils and they're going to get more radiation in their eyes, and they're going to start seeing things. And then they went around the room and everybody's like, oh, I saw my grandma. One guy said he saw a dragon. Okay, there's the dragon. He saw a dragon. And then when they came to me, because I'm vulnerable and authentic and I'm an energy worker, I was a practitioner since I was fucking 15, and I must have been 30 something at that point. And I very politely said, while I'm sitting there in Lotus, I'm like, well, has anybody ever considered that, dilating your pupils causes you to see trippy things? You ever do that when you were a kid? And they fucking cursed me out. And that's what I'm saying. You have to take chances, expose yourself. You have to test the waters, right? You might say something and upset somebody. You don't know what they're carrying, but that's what boundaries are for. Then you have to retract. So I'm not trying to push anything on anybody, but and these are the things that I haven't just connected on my own. I connected Walter Russell, Dr. Randolph Stone, Talbot, and Wallace Thornhill, and they're scientists. And the information that I presented is actually electrical engineering backed science. Again, just to recap, the only two things that EU theory challenges is that the electrical fields are also perturbing, not just gravity. They are also perturbing, right? And then also this idea that space is empty. It's not. It has a medium that carries electrical charge. And so that's not even that controversial because they discuss it all the time. And even scientists know, oh yeah, we know that the universe is electrical, but they just continue to keep calling it charged particles because that's what they're used to. If you've been in abusive relationships constantly your whole life, that's what you're used to. The brainstem loves continuity. The Ouroboros, or the serpent eating its own tail, is actually a representation, an illustration of the bondage of sensory interpretation in a nervous system. Your spirit or soul or whatever, the squishy aspect of all this, it comes into a capsule, and now you're interpreting everything by default, and you can't do shit about that. And you're being bombarded with sensory input events, right? The people who make fun of you because of your disability, or the difficulty you might have with your child, and but you can't. It's like this is the turmoil, the chaos that ensues. Now, chaos is static. Think of chaos as the neuter field. Now, the quantum slit experiment says that when perception comes in, it stops the field and it creates a particle that drops down into experience, right? So we start with a static field, a perception mechanism comes in and freezes that field. That's where we reside. The idea is to keep perturbing it, right? Perturbing it so it doesn't get stuck. The swamp is disease, stuckness. I'm in a job for too long. Your voltage just builds up inside your capsule and it doesn't go anywhere. And then you blow up at the lady at the food store. I'm dead serious that my trauma practice, consulting people, and you said you don't want to talk about this, but I'm just going to hint at it, veterans and everybody else, I literally talk to them about pressure conditions mostly. Because you have your subconscious protecting you from something you may not even be aware of. You might be working on it with a therapist or whatever, but the guy who saw his friend's head get blown off in Vietnam, his body still goes like this when he hears something fall in the food store, and he can't control it. So you have to learn self-regulation. How do you do that if you don't have a relationship with the reptilian brain? Now, I can't get into that because I don't want to talk more. I don't want to take up. I love this shit. But if you want to go down the spiritual road from a very constructive perspective, when you start looking at stories and parables, the warrior's journey, defeating the serpent or the dragon, is dealing with the chaos in your mind, because your subconscious mind is identified as the reptilian brainstem. Why? Because it's the evolved part of the brain. It's the part of the brain that's been around for a while. Therefore, it has all the memory, the memetics, the memes, the things that your subconscious mind reaches to that it's telling you is happening when it has to make sense or close the deal on this feeling. Because all feelings can't just happen forever. The charges have to discharge. So if a charge comes into your body and you say, I'm hungry, I want to get a hamburger, the discharge of that circuit is going and getting the hamburger. And then that resets the timeline. Then you do your laundry. Laundry reaches a maximum. Now you're drying your laundry. Now you're folding your laundry. Complete. Zero.
Well, I haven't done laundry in a long time, but yeah.
I can smell you from here, Steve.
Yeah. No, I mean, my wife handles all that stuff. I'm very blessed. Besides, I think when we first lived together, I washed clothes the man way, which is to just put everything in one load, and she doesn't like that. You got to separate, whites, and I don't do any. I just throw it all in, We want to thank Troll for a kind and generous $10. He was buying some 1,500-year-old seeds that he says will sprout somehow. And I'm curious about that. That's pretty interesting. Troll says, I'll keep you posted on how well the beans grow after I plant them. Probably not for a month or two in starter cups. Well, thank you for your kindness, generosity, and support. I want to hear about this and why. What's the benefit of beans that old? Troll. Is it like heirloom or like an older species that's coveted or something? But thanks for your kindness and for being a member and helping us to praise the cash.
Praise the cash.
I love that. When I first met you, man, I was like, who is this goofy character and who is that kid? That's got to be his kid.
Yeah.
And then you were talking about UFOs, and I was like, okay. See, when you take a shot and you find that unique place where you can position yourself, and I'm going to say, in terms of business, even entrepreneurship, you have to throw a dart. You have to take chances. You have to fail in life in order to build up that inertia to explode into another moment. Okay. So failing is generative. Okay.
Oh,
So
absolutely. You fail your way to success. And I love that saying, fortune favors the bold, because it's true. Like, you got to have some, and I used to have a friend in the music business, coincidentally, and he taught me this other thing, that you want to be successful. He said this to me one time, and it stuck with me my whole life to this very day. He said, Stephen, if you want to be successful, you got to put your balls out there. And I'm like, if you think about it, it's kind of crude statement, but it's true, because you're going to put your balls out there and take a chance. They might get smashed, but when you put your balls out there and you're bold in things you want to do, you might fail along the way. I failed in many things, but I always learn from those things, and we move forward and into success. This show was a lot of trial and error until we've kind of gotten it dialed in to the way that I like it or want it to be perceived or consumed. Oh, Troll says the seed beans are from plants that were grown from those beans. Okay. All right. And Mark, who requested your appearance here tonight, says, Joey has brought a lot to the table. Hopefully everyone got at least one thing to eat.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, but we're over 2 hours and 30 minutes. I wanted to keep this show a little shorter, but it's okay. I think we're going to wrap things up here. And yeah, I appreciate you sharing your unique perspectives with us tonight.
Thank you so much, Stephen, and I'll see you next time, okay?
Yeah, you have a good evening. Thanks for doing this. I appreciate it.
Take care, bud.
Interesting stuff. All right, friends. Well, we have done more than our due diligence, and Mr. Esposito has given everybody a lot of stuff to think about. One of the things with things like this in these presentations is that they're so dense. That's the term that I would use. There's just so much to think about, and I don't know. I understand the science side of things that he was talking about more in the beginning of the presentation than the more esoteric things, but I like the esoteric stuff too. So anyway, lots to think about tonight. I'm not sure what's happening for the rest of the weekend, whether I'm taking a few days off. I may be going to the cabin, but I got to check on the weather and the road conditions. They had two huge snowstorms. I think they got 8 inches once and 10 inches the next time. So the roads, I have to check in with my wonderful neighbor who just lets me know if I'm going to be able to make it to my cabin from the main road. He's my nearest cabin neighbor. Not sure if I'm going or not, and I really have to figure that out before I decide what's happening for the rest of the weekend here. At the very least, I have some replays planned, some Truthseekers Classic, including another interview by popular demand. The last one, I call him the wild man of ufology, and that's William Warner, who coincidentally is Christopher Mellon's cousin, and a member of that Mellon-Warner family. Interesting guy. I have another interview, and people like the replay of that, his first interview so much, we'll be playing the second one probably sometime this weekend. And by the way, just if you're keeping count, people have asked me to do more live shows, and I've tried to do that for you. We've done 5 live shows: Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and now Thursday. So that's 5 shows in the till for the week. We have done our due diligence, but maybe we'll do something fun this weekend. I also have a couple of production videos that I've been working on that I hope to debut, and if I can get them finished, maybe I'll do that this weekend. So that's all we got for you for tonight. However, follow me on Twitter at Stephen Cambion. We always announce the live events and live shows here on Twitter. Also, I want to take a moment to thank all of the new friends that we're meeting on Instagram. I'm lazy about social media, and I've had that Instagram account forever, but since they just recently started allowing content creators to live stream, Now that account is active, and you can follow me there. It's at Truthseeker Show, one Truthseeker and the word show, but all one word, at Truthseeker Show on Instagram. There you will catch all of our imagery. So I'll be taking a lot more pictures that are related to the show and things like that. I appreciate everybody that is following me on Instagram. I check that every day and see the notifications, and I'm pleased to see so many new friends there. And also Instagram, since it's so imagery based, I get to look in and connect a user ID or a username to a face. And I always like that, as well as connecting to people here on the panel shows. It's nice to put a face and a voice to a chat room user ID. And I've been pleased to do that so much here. People are asking me when the next panel show is, and I think the last one was so chaotic, it maybe in a week or two. I don't, yeah, but those things can be fun as well. I want to thank all of you kind and generous benefactors. Oh, that reminds me, we had a couple of incredibly generous PayPal pledges, and just so everybody's aware, I read every single super chat. If you send a super chat, I read it live on the air. If you send support through PayPal, a PayPal pledge, instructions to do that are in the description of the video. We read every single one of them, and we thank every single person who sends any support our way. If you become a YouTube channel member during a live broadcast, we give you a big thank you and a shout out. And we thank all of you kind and generous YouTube channel members and Patreon supporters. We want to thank RK, initials RK, for a kind and generous PayPal pledge of $100. No message, just a kind and generous $100 PayPal pledge. We thank you for your kindness, generosity, and support. Always nice to log into my PayPal and see something like that. And we've got Maria with kind and generous $10 PayPal, who says that she wants to see more jellyfish UFOs and says there is many more videos like this around the internet. You should do a show covering all of the jellyfish UFOs from around the world. Maybe I'll do that. It's kind of a stupid thing, jellyfish UFOs now, but we aim to please. And Marie is always throwing a couple bucks in her hat. I'll see if I can't get something like that together. And we thank initials RK for a kind and generous $100 PayPal pledge. Thank you for your kindness, generosity, and support, and all of you guys for helping us to praise the cash. Here's one for all of you guys, including you Patreon supporters, Twitch subscribers, Gold Pill people, and all of you that are sending any support our way. Thanks for helping us.
Praise the cash, praise the cash, praise the cash. Thank you for your kindness. Thank you for your generosity. Praise the cash, praise the cash, praise the cash.
All right, friends. So what else can I say? That's all that we got for you for now, but I'll make an announcement about whatever is happening here on my Twitter. Follow me on Twitter at Stephen Cambion. I want to thank our guest, Joey Esposito, for trying to educate me on this electric universe thing. I think he did a great job, and you know, he really tried to put together a really dense, information-packed presentation. It was more slides than David Wilcock. So that's all we got for you, friends. I'll be back soon, but I'm not quite sure when. I'll make an announcement on Twitter tomorrow, letting everybody know. Until then, you could join our Discord server as well, and I'm sure one of our mods, Arden Paranormal, can share the link to our Discord. If you enjoy these live chats that we do during our live taping events for the podcast, please join our Discord, where you can chat with like-minded people 24/7. And we've got all different categories in there. No matter what you're into in conspiracy land, you'd probably enjoy the Discord. So that's all I got for you, friends. Until next time, my name is Stephen Cambion. Good night, and God bless all of you.